Okay, folks, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. And we'd like to call the meeting to order, please. And we'll start with the Aboriginal Acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Tanaha, the Silex and Senex peoples, and is home to Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honour their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. And with that, are there any late items? Hearing none, motion to adopt the agenda, please. Councillor Renwick and Councillor Woodward. All in favour? Carried. And there are no minutes from the previous meeting to adopt. Recommendations from the Committee of the Whole, none. Requests, delegations, bylaws, and we're on number 10, budget. And I think, Colin, you're going to be the lead on this today, I believe.
I'm not sure Colin has joined the meeting yet.
Oh, I thought I'd seen him up there, but maybe not.
We do have J.O. Cormac.
Okay, Kevin. Kevin or Colin? Or maybe Chris, I don't know.
Yeah, Colin will. I think he's just getting on. So
Yeah, he was heading over there to get set up, so we can't be too far away.
Yeah, there he
He
is.
did give us a fair share of paper here to work with.
We're missing a few councillors today.
Yeah, 2 so far, but Nicole's going to join us a little bit later. Yeah.
Okay.
And Janice, I don't think she's coming in.
Okay.
Your worship, are you ready to roll?
Yes, sir. We were just waiting for you, Colin, to see you pop up there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We're all done, ready, waiting for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple things. What hoping to accomplish today is we've gone back and from last week, and there's been a few changes that I wanted to identify on the capital plan and a couple of updates, just even on some of the actuals that we were looking at in the current year, and from there was hoping to kind of solidify what we have in the 2022 kind of budget as far as capital goes, and then I was going to go through the funding portion, which I think is important for council to see, and then from that stage, I had one other document that Peter is going to join us because he's got his bubble graph and his bar graph that he wanted to show us. And Gabe, I'm wondering if you can mute the it's mute in the boardroom there. Yeah, okay. And then I just wanted to have a discussion just on sort of in particular, the major grant providers. You've seen this document before. I think it's important for council to see because I sometimes think it gets lost, and it's certainly noted in particular that the mayor had to remind one group of the great work that we had done on their building, and that doesn't come without a significant cost to the city and to the taxpayer. And so sometimes it's just a good reminder for council to have all the information on how we help out this particular sector, not just including the fact that we provide them with a grant. So we'll go over that, just more of an educational component. So I'm going to start here by sharing my screen with the updated capital. Bear with me for a moment, please. My computer does not like to do things once we're on these WebEx or Zoom or Teams stuff. It just seems to really lag, so I apologize. I don't know why this won't open. Oh, here we go. We can see that, council, the capital sheet. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Woodward. So a couple things And what we try to do is we try to indicate areas that changed in yellow. And again, we sent this out there. I know it's not always the easiest document to see, but again, you should have a copy with you as well. But I'm trying to share this at I guess a viewing model that allows you to see the numbers and whatnot. So a couple things that you'll notice that we are higher in the hardware and special projects. What was noted when we had gone through last year was that we had the call recorder at the Nelson Police Department was in the queue for being purchased and installed, and there was an understanding that it had been, but what we found out is that it hadn't been, and it's happening basically kind of now or in January. So we needed to increase the budget by about $60,000 for Nelson Police Department call recorder. Again, this is an important tool that they need in order to function as far as whatever calls that they come in that they need to either transcript later, or making sure that if someone has called in about something that what was said between police and the public is there available to go back and be reviewed. The next one down, we're slightly higher on software projects than we originally were. Unfortunately, this is one of the challenges with Excel, and if you're not always making sure that if you put in a new line that you make sure that it adds into the column. And so we had so one of the software upgrades had not been included. Although we discussed it with council last time, it wasn't actually, when we looked at the numbers to make sure we were balancing, that we noticed that it had been missed or left out of the addition. When we went down here to buildings, we took a look at going out to 2026, and there was some sort of contingency numbers in there that we were was putting a lot of pressure, and we felt unnecessarily so, because we're still 5 years away from even getting there. And so we adjusted those numbers to get the special projects to be in line with being just the library and removing the contingency. And part of that was a funding source. The other part that I wanted to point out, which again visually can be sort of confusing, and that is the fact that under the building reserve, if you looked at 2023 and 2024, there's actually a negative balance in the actual building reserve. And you're like, well, what's up with that? But what had happened is that when we looked at the borrowing component and when we would need to borrow for these projects, much like we have for Nelson Hydro a number of years ago, when we needed money in the reserve, we borrowed ahead of time, which then put money in the reserve, which then got spent on the capital as ongoing. And that's where you're seeing down here where we've got the grant money for the ISIP, we've called it. And these are for the civic upgrade. We've got the deep energy retrofit project. We also have the full concourse. Pardon me. As those capital projects council had saw those last May, and it's still waiting on the federal government to release the information. Understanding is that all of these are on the minister's desk waiting for signature. I know that the Parliament's just back in session. I don't know if that's one of the things that's holding things up, but again, we keep hearing, and I'm sure, much like yourselves, we as staff are getting tired of any day now. We just wish that any day would show up, and then we could at least now plan for what's going to happen for 2022 and onwards. The library, as we've talked about, we've pushed that out slightly, understanding that if we're going to be successful in that project, that's not something that we'd be able to do this year, and so we've got that out in mostly 2023, 24, and 25. The other component you'll notice is that under the Community Works Fund, so it's where you're seeing here, my hand is 597, 854, and 600. We had noted when we looked at not only the building reserve, but in the presentation to council back in May, is that we had looked at borrowing, and we're waiting to find out. When we looked at what we presented in May, what we recognized is that the city was going to borrow, yes, but we also were looking at providing $1.5 million in additional funding. And so this is where we looked at the Community Works Fund and said, this is a place where if we're using $500,000 a year to help with, if we are successful in getting the grant from the civic, if the feds ever, make that decision, that we would be able to have that funding from the city, which helps take down how much money we need to get as a loan, which obviously helps out just with repayments into the future. And we'll see that when we look at the reserve balances.
Colin, you might want to touch on
Again, on the good side here, in reviewing what had come in for. Yep.
Colin, could you just, staying on that building facilities funding,
Yes.
could you just explain, so we're all clear on what's happening with the 310 ward? You can see the numbers there go a little erratic as you go out.
18.
So you're talking about this line here, the 318?
I'm talking about 318, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So one thing that we have built into our agreement with because it's a very, very unique situation that happens here at 310 Ward. The city has purchased the building. However, we are in a lease agreement with the province. And so the province kind of is through their lease, they are the ones that sort of have contracted with the WSI. It may have changed by now, but the group that does the maintenance, and there's a couple other pieces that go on for that. So even though we're the landlord, we sort of end up with these leases from them that we engage with to not only have BC services on the first floor, and then we've got Ministry of Transportation on floor 4 and portion of 5, and then Attorney General on floor 3. So as a part of that contract and what percentage they are in our building, when we do upgrades that include efficiencies and which would be cost savings, for example, when we did the boilers, or if we were to do the windows or to do other activities that assist in not only the efficiency but cost savings overall, that the province is willing to help fund that with us as part of our lease. So when you see this number across the bottom, this relates to some significant upgrades that Peter Sinstad, our manager of facilities, has discussed in the past. And then I'm sure when we see and talk with him today about his bubble graph, that we'll also get more information from him. But in 2025, there's some significant monies in there to look at things replacing the windows. So again, windows that, especially in today's world, and hopefully as we go future here, that even can adjust if you're on, depending on what side of the building you're on. I've been mostly on this side of the building, which I think I would suggest is sort of southwest, and it in the summertime it gets pretty hot in here with the sun, and I think that things like getting the windows where they actually adjust the shade and whatnot for what's happening on temperature, and same on the other side on the front, whether or not they help out with in retaining heat. So there's things like that we've got plans for. If we have to replace all the windows in this particular building, if that was a project on the renewal, that would qualify under areas that they would assist in funding those upgrades, which I think is a pretty fantastic thing for both provincial and the municipal governments to be in partnership on trying to renew buildings.
Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, that was a unique clause we negotiated into the lease agreements when we initially bought this building.
Yeah. And so some of the ones that you'll see across the bottom being smaller are things that we've talked about this before, where we upgrade the lighting. So, for example, on the first floor now, instead of the lights being on all the time, if there's nobody in an office, then the lights shut off. And same with it in the evening, because I think that's certainly one of those things that we used to get from the community. It's like, why is City Hall, like, why is every single light on in the building at whatever time at night? And so we've been really working on whether it's in the halls and in the common places and in the floors where we are the major tenant, that we have been working on that lighting system to try to improve it and improve efficiencies. So when we do those types of upgrades, that's where we go to the province and say, based on this clause, there's expectation that you're helping us fund this.
So Colin, staying on that building of facilities, just for myself, and then I'll get if there's other questions on that page. The Civic Centre upgrade, we noticed in the delays we had on some of our other projects, that in that period of time, costs escalated dramatically. Is that project potentially at risk as well?
Well, I would agree, Mayor. And so that's one of the, again, Gabe, if you can mute the order. Yep. Thank you. So that's obviously one of the risks that we do have on waiting to see if we're successful on the grant, is that we will then have to go out and tender. Of course, Mayor, we would always bring those back to council if there was a challenge. And the one thing that I would hope that there would be some confidence in staff is that we don't just decide, okay, well, if this hasn't come in where we think it should, or there has been cost escalation, some may be justifiable that we may have to go back and say, is this a project that we considering to move forward on? Like you said, we've talked about it before, if you get 75, 80 cent dollars covered by the government grants, that makes a project work. When it starts moving into 50 or less because of cost escalations and delays on finding out of the project, then yeah, I think that council, it's behooving on staff to come to council and say, we don't think that this project is something that we would suggest moving on. But we also have a very creative group here, I think, that works at other solutions, that we don't just take, here's what we got a result of that, is far outside of what we expected, and then we look at ways to mitigate that. How do we take on some of the risk? Do we try to operate some of these things in-house? So those were conversations we are going to have. But it is important, and I appreciate you raising it, is that although it's sitting in here as a capital amount, and especially as we go out even into 2023, 24, 25 with some big numbers there on the library, we have to have them in our financial plan in order to apply for grants to show that yes, this is what we're going to do and this is how we plan to fund them when we are going, and or if governments are wanting to see what our 5-year financial plan is, to see whether or not we have them in the plan itself. Then this is one of the practices that we do, and that's why sometimes it will look quite skewed when we look at the financial statement. You say you had a budget of X amount for capital and you only ended up at a portion of it. That's a consistent thing that can happen when we're in these sort of hyper grant providing times that we have over the last number of years, where you're competing with a lot of other groups and they're oversubscribed, and so but to be able to have it in your plan, to make sure that it's available in your financial plan if you are successful, that we need to include it. But the downside is sometimes is that yes, you look at it and say, okay, well, you guys weren't successful, or why is this big number here and why is it being spent? But as one notices that so much of these particular special projects, whether it's the civic upgrade and or the library, are absolutely grant dependent, and you will see that in a number of places, whether or not we have it in our operating funds, that we plan to hire this person to do this project, but it is grant dependent. We don't get the grant, then we don't hire the individual. We get the grant, then we do hire the individual. So that's a kind of a common pattern that comes with having to provide a 5-year plan.
So on that note then, Colin, going forward, for future, of course you can't fetter future councils, but would it be prudent to have some kind of a formula that you would go at a certain number and you wouldn't go at a certain number, unless, you could bring other partners in or whatever? Like, would a 75-cent dollar be the trigger that you'd go with the project? Would it be worth looking at those types of things? Because we can all get emotionally involved in a project and then it comes back in, higher than we anticipated, and it's tough to walk away from that. Sometimes that work that's been done and the connection we all have to the project, etc.
I would say that it depends on the project. Like if we have to replace water lines and we get 25-cent grants, like why wouldn't we take the 25-cent grant? So I think it would be bad policy to have an overall one, because you would, it would just limit your options. They're always going to come back to the council, and it's up to that council to decide. It's in your financial plan. If it doesn't come in at what's in your financial plan, then council has to amend the financial plan. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
Okay.
like I said, I think you want to look at it, but what's driving those over costs? When do you have to do that work anyway? Would you change the scope? I think there's a myriad of options that you would consider before outright not going ahead with the project.
Okay, thanks, Colin. All right, on that page, any questions for Colin so far? Councillor Page, I think I've seen your hand up.
Yeah, no, just thinking about what you've said, Mayor and Kevin. Just wondering, I think I've got this correct, but I'm looking to staff here to give me that confidence. Our lease agreements are determined as a component of property assessment for the building or building assessment. Like, do we not determine the lease out to these tenants based on the value of that property?
Well, actually, it works the other way. The value of your property for a commercial building
I get
based
that.
based on the rent that you generate in that building.
I thought we had a number in our corporate lease policy, some sort of percentage.
We lease that. Oh, you're thinking of to nonprofits.
Yeah, which is the majority of the
Yeah.
building, isn't it?
Well, the majority of our rent is actually, most of our rent to nonprofits are for $1.
Yeah.
This is commercial rents to the province and other.
Sorry, I was talking
How
about
many-
Civic. I'm talking about Civic.
Yeah, they're not paying. Oh yeah, for the percentage of the assessment. Yeah, you're correct.
Okay, so then conceivably these improvements will also improve the value of the building, and that number will shift.
Right. So and
Not
this is where,
necessarily, right, Colin?
yeah. And so again,
BC
to be,
assessment doesn't spend a lot of time on our public buildings.
they don't, and in fact, I'll kind of see that in when I was doing some history sleuthing for some of the buildings that we have, and it's exactly as CAO Cormac talked about, is some of them have stayed flat for multiple years, even though there's been real growth in the overall assessed value of commercial buildings. But I'll come aside. What I really need to do is just answer Councillor Page's question. The leases that we have here at the province are not predicated on that formula that you're speaking about for our other buildings. Like I said, it's a very strange things. We actually get leases from the province, even though we're the landlord, and so we negotiate on what the square foot value is based on a kind of where they were set and having an inflationary factor that has been kind of going. Certainly, one of the things that we had heard from previous councils as well, and this is why we try to make this as a one-stop shop for government, is that we don't want to compete with our Baker Street and our Vernon and Victoria Street businesses, and so we want to keep these full floor tenanted spaces that we have, and so we've kind of worked with them, and whatever was set sort of back in that day, there has been inflationary components, but there isn't that same formula that you're speaking about, Councillor Page, as if we've got a building like you said, the Civic, and where we go, okay, this is based on assessed value, and it's a formula that's square footage times percentage of the assessed value, much like we do with soccer. And then we kind of lock that in for a certain time period. And then when that renews again, that's not in the situation with 310 Ward, just to be clear on that. It's a totally different arrangement that was, way back when we purchased the building and made the leases up.
So that was done. We had it assessed by a property assessment company, and the rates that were in the lease were based on the fair market rates at that time, and then, as Colin said, they've been adjusted afterwards. But your point on, we haven't really spent a lot of time on the assessed value of our own buildings that are, occupied by nonprofits, as Colin said. BC assessment doesn't spend a lot of time because it's, we determine the rates ourselves. So they wouldn't necessarily go up, but that's something to flag.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, it's a great point that way. because when we created the percentage, there had been, a pretty flat growth on assessed value. But as properties have exploded, land values and property values have exploded, that has, and in fact, when we talk to certain partners that we have that have leases that will be coming up, it is a good question, and I think it's something that we will have to go back to the drawing board a bit on. What is a proper percentage to be charging to have a rent that stays in line, and not just with the fact that we've got building inflation, commercial building inflation happening? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it's just as easy as, flagging BC assessment. If anyone can challenge their BC assessment, can't we challenge our BC assessment?
Yeah, we certainly can, and I would say to you that it's usually like as CEO Cormac spoke, but once they that's not usually a place, because usually it's they're focusing on other buildings that are active and
taxes. Yeah.
Exactly right, going to pay taxes, and we don't. But certainly seeing a lift, and again, I'll talk about it a bit further on some of the lifts that I had seen just recently, not for all buildings, but for 2022. Again, as you spoke about, this is not a situation because their rent is $1, but to see how much there's jumped, but we also did spend a significant amount of money upgrading it. So like I said, we'll get to that topic as far as that going on. But there are certain places where we've got land, that people are leasing out some land, and the value of land has really increased. And so some of them we have on overholding, because I think this is a good conversation that needs to have, that the percentage at the time would likely have provided a good comparable, and we give a break, remembering that it's a break that we give to non-for-profits versus those that are for-profit. But I think that the percentage needs to be looked at in light of the huge increases in assessed value that we've been seeing. And again, when we have any leases coming up, that would be something that we would be, I think, wanting to talk about and look at.
Okay, so it sounds like you guys will look at how what a better determinant might be. Okay.
And I think the determinant is fine. I just think whether or not we need to adjust the rate lower because of such the huge increase in assessed values, especially over the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Mayor?
No, just a comment there on the lease, and that's a good question you just had. But on the lease, we've had a kind of an unwritten sort of policy around here that we weren't going to get into a fight with the private sector.
Right.
As far as we wanted to be competitive, but not, not sticking our nose into an area that that are going to be undercutting, the private sector either on rent. So.
That's correct. Thanks, Kate. Again, remembering too that we have this clause that if we're doing upgrades, that now you're committed to not only kind of the regular O&M, but we do capital upgrades, and you're helping to help fund us. That we don't have, again, in the same way someone might say, well, what about our rate? It's at this. It's like, yes, but that's your rate. We're responsible for the building envelope and doing those other work. But here at the province might say, well, maybe you're not as much as market on Baker Street. And it's like, we don't want to compete with that in the first place. We want to keep these government tenants here. We want to make it a one-stop shop, but also as part of their particular agreement, they're willing to come in and help fund capital, which is not something that there would be an expectation on with other private entity building.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a quick question on the tech side. I get the sense you guys are getting a ton of background noise from council chambers. Is that what's going on?
That's correct.
Okay, well, I'll try to mute it and make eye contact with the mayor when he wants to speak. But yeah, there is maybe that will create a bit of a lag. So just a heads up.
Yes, and I think whatever you've been doing has been working once we. So yes, so thank you for being cognizant of that. Okay, on this budget, the only update was when we got the original request for the new equipment for the new pumper truck that's supposed to be coming in 2023. We had added something twice in there. So again, a good news story is that there's a lower request from the equipment required at the truck. So just wanted to share that with council. Okay, we've come back, or our Public Works Department has come back. We had talked about the Lakeside Street and Curb. You'll notice that the couple of businesses there over the last couple of years have they've purchased those chunks of land, and so we've been able to take that money from the land sale reserve. That's going towards funding the capital upgrades, and you'll see that based on the estimation for doing that block, sidewalk, curb, and some meters that they're estimating about $90,000. So those are a couple of numbers that we wanted to include on that. And I think as well, there was just some adjustments on Community Works Fund as far as our overall analysis of the reserves, like I said, which we will get into in a bit. So we had some changes there as well.
Colin, in hindsight, I think that was a very good decision by council, because you noticed that two of those businesses have already expanded their on that property on Lake Street, so
yeah,
it's good for everybody.
I totally agree. And
And Colin, just point out that land sale reserve is from the profits we made on selling that land, right?
that's correct.
That's going right back to that, pay for those sidewalk upgrades.
That's correct. Yeah, so that's why we tried to kind of highlight them in yellow there. They're sort of copacetic. Okay, one thing that we had just missed was putting in the fact that we, as we all know, we had funded, and with the Nelson and District Arts Council, we've been sort of a main funder, which allows their ED, Mrs. Black, to be able to go out and be successful on getting additional funds. And we've certainly seen our community come alive with murals over the last number of years. And so I know that council, we had missed that last time, saying didn't have a number in here, and we had made sure that we had made the payment to NENDAC, and so we wanted to make sure that was in there. And also council, based on resolution earlier in the year, had committed to the funding for 2022, and you'll see that 25,000. Not that hasn't changed from last time, but just noting that's what that Mural Festival funding is for. Just a couple small notes here. In talks with the airport group, the Nelson District Airport Society, and us, that they got additional work done at the airport while they had the pavers there, and they're also in the process of getting their automatic gate installed. They said that the paving is completed, and they were noting that the still had a little bit left work to get done on getting the automatic gate in place. So again, they're really excited about that. So it removes the keys, and there'll be a code, and that should get them security wise and better functioning, and the fact that it moves. And that's basically funded either from the air access program, the grant that they were successful in their application for, and then remaining funds end up coming out of the airport reserve. And again, too, you'll notice that there's other funding stakeholders. Those are other proponents down at the airport. So whether or not it's the helicopter companies or people that have hangars and that sort of thing, also saying, we understand that we've been great on getting some funds from the BCAP, but I also want, a section here I want to chip in to be able to fund that. So I thought that was really valuable, and I just really have appreciated the relationship that the city has got with this last number of years, with them taking on the contract of operations, and their attention to detail as far as trying to make sure that they are collecting the fees, and I think becoming much more collaborative with all of the stakeholders and users down at the airport, and kind of lifting up that funding at the location, working with the tenants and trying to get them to improve different sections of whether it's their hangar or, like I said, providing funding here so that they can do paving. And I think it's a real positive for the city. They've really done a good job, and I think I spoke with this last time. Because of COVID the last couple of years, they really wanted to celebrate and honor council for working with them and showing, as we've been putting this money in the airport reserve and having it available, and some of the improvements they have done down at the airport, whether or not it's actually at the terminal itself or, like I said, the paving, and hoping to at least have a bit of a celebration with us, because they have really done some major upgrades. And I think as a partnership as well, working with them, they are speaking with the chair of the society. He does have a plan to be able to go out and speak to the regional district and again, trying to have a commitment from them, because he could see the value, whether or not it's being able to have the air ambulances fly in here. That was one of those things that I just as a quick aside, I had noted that people were upset that the runway had some clearing done on it when, say, their street hadn't been cleared on it. And one thing I just wanted the community to know is that one of the reasons that we do that is that if we ever need that air ambulance to fly in here, they need to be able to land on that runway. And so, as much as we can totally respect that someone is thinking, hey, what goes on there, we can't imagine what would be a very sad thing if the plane couldn't come in and pick up someone that needed emergency health care to be flown out of our community. So one of those things to think about.
Colin,
but again, the overall.
It was in this week, the air ambulance, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I appreciate people can be, they observe things and it can be upsetting because they're like, hey, this hasn't been done. But we don't just do things haphazardly. We try to make sure that if we're going to have that airport and have it open and have it available, one of the main functions is that the fact that we do have the ability to have the air ambulance come in here. So anyway, just leave that aside. But just as I thought I would mention that, because I did see some comments out there about what was the city thinking. And again, we also work with them as far as they take a lot, in that particular situation, we had so much snow. Yes, the city snow blower helped out with that, but for the most part, they have their volunteers that use equipment down there to clean off the runway. So that's actually, there isn't a lot of expense that goes on from the city in regards to how that's being managed. We do have a contract with NAS, and they've been doing some very good improvements. I think that they, in the near future, want to come and talk to council. They've got some ideas on some fees that again can not be. They're very cognizant. The one thing I like about it is that they're working with their stakeholders down there, understanding that they don't want to put pressure on there. But when we have items that go back into the airport and improvement, and the people that use it on a regular basis are helping fund that, it goes a long way. And so I think that they've got some other plans that they've been talking through with their stakeholders, but naturally, it being a city of Nelson Airport, they need to come through us for any change in fee bylaws. And so you may see that in the near future, maybe not for a while, because they're sort of going through some challenges because of the passing of Wade Nearing and kind of leadership and trying to stick handle those changes that they're unfortunately had to deal with.
Thank you.
Only thing here in the general capital is that we were waiting on the additional pickup for hydro, and it has been decided that in a review that they're comfortable with the amount of equipment they have, so that that truck purchase has come off for the current year, for 2022. And it's not in 2023. Again, we talked about having a business case to make that decision, and at this point in time, it's been decided that we're going to move forward with the equipment that we have.
Colin, I got a question on the bridge reserve. Does that seem a bit on the low side for the work we want to do? Because we have the bridge behind the bottle depot. And I think we were talking about doing the bridge going to Public Works.
Yes, and I think that on those particular, to see if I can get there, Mayor, to where you're talking about. So you're talking about here. So the funding that we set aside is mostly for this, or is for the Kootenay River and Canal bridges. Yeah. So there's a couple things there. It's a massive bridge, and if it ever got to a place, yes, you would say that the amount that we're putting into that reserve would be low if you had to replace the whole bridge. And again, if we needed to do that, obviously we would be going to the government saying on a capital side, we certainly couldn't fund a bridge that's, provides redundancy in many cases for our route, but is not a total need. The monies that we put aside there, Mayor and Council, is sort of on that to keep it so that when we get to, Director Innes spoke about it, there's a couple joints and there's some chipping and some maintenance and that sort of thing. And so we feel that having that money build up in there, and this is where we would fund that from, the kind of that transportation capital, that funding that we have on in this particular capital reserves project is the place where we lean on. For example, there you're saying row 547 Silica Lane bridge replacement. That's where that would be funded from. Either that or the Community Works Fund, between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, a couple components here. Just upgrades, I think, on allocations. We had gone back to see where we were, in particular on projected actuals. You'll see a number of changes. And again, just some real exciting news. And we sort of received that when you got your upgrade report from your major grant recipients at the last CAL meeting. And I think that the cultural development, Joy Barrett there had been successful with CBT, and I think had shown us the Cottonwood Park shade structures and other amenity improvements. And then I know that they've already met down there with the Azuzi Society and our development services, and we've been successful with CBT for a grant of $219,000 to again continue the ongoing improvement of that park. And we just didn't have that the last time that we spoke in the budget, and so we wanted to make sure that that was entered. I also, on row 903, you'll see that there is the NDCC lighting upgrade, and in my discussions with them, it had expected to be a 2-year project, was totaling around $50,000. In my conversations with them, they did not undertake that in 2021. That's why there's a 0 in the projected actuals for the current year. And looking at what they're planning to do for 2023 or 2022, they said we think that the amount that will be required from the city is about $23,000. So I've got that in as a placeholder. And at that point in time, they didn't think that will complete the project. So if council remember, we had 22.8 in 2021, but we also had another $24,000 in 2022. It looks like now, instead of a combined around 50, it's going to be around 23,000. And the other components there, we're just updating between some accounts. We have lots of accounts, and it's not difficult for things to get miscoded. And so as we've looked through what happened on the projected actuals, we've updated those, and you can see in many ways we're closer to what was budgeted and or under. And for example, on row 922, the ask was peeled back from development services, understanding that council had provided the $80,000 in 2021 to do some design work, and so they're just carrying forward the amount that had been requested in 2021. The remaining $38,000 is now put into 2022 to continue on other design factors for active transportation projects. And again, down below, some just allocations, changes, mostly just related to what projects we have ongoing, or if we were needing Community Works Fund at 24,000, now it's at 23, just making those changes there. And I don't know if there's any questions from council on this particular part.
Pretty silent out there.
Okay, so Okay, so my assumption, Mayor, if you can confirm that you're seeing the water license reserve page up there?
Yeah, we're moving to a different.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's up on the screen.
It's up.
Okay, thank you. And so this was, it's a good one to start, and after conversation there for
Colin, could we,
Councillor
just a
Trowell.
second, please? Colin, I was
Yes.
looking at the equipment purchases there somewhere, right? And I'm trying to see where the, as an example, we have a fair amount of investment. What's our recovery on some of that stuff?
Now, are you speaking about what funds that do we put into the reserve each year?
No, I see that we have a lot of equipment we purchase each year, right?
Yes.
And I'm just looking for something that tells me what the recovery is when we dispose of that. Where does that
Oh,
fit?
yes. Yeah, so what we usually do, Mayor, and then you'll see a couple of examples actually. If you look at row 817, where we had a budget of 210,000 in 2021,
Yeah,
and then in 2022, you'll see that the amount is 183.
right.
I'm assuming that you can kind of see that, and you can see that also just on trucks 828, 829, not as much, but two things that we try to do. One is if we know that we need to purchase the vehicle, we ask that we make an assumption or assessment, an estimate of what we will get as a trade-in. Many of these vehicles are desirable. We've got an excellent mechanical crew down at Public Works, and because we take care of our equipment, we do see a good trade-in when we are going out to purchase. And so, for example, on a few of those, you can see that also it can really change and depend as council may be aware, the used vehicle market has actually really increased. And so we are seeing some better trade-in pricing in the current couple of years than we have in the past. But yes, we have been quite successful. And it's one of the areas where I do ask Manager Cayley when he is going to plunk in a number here for a replacement, that it's not only what he estimates it's going to cost, but sort of a netting effect of what he expects to get on a trade-in. So we try to put that number in as a net at the time of putting in the budget. But again, where we were successful, even just looking at that row 817, where we had budgeted 2010. Now we know this vehicle is showing up, or has shown up, but we know that we actually did much better than what was budgeted, and that may have been not only price but on trade-in as well.
Thank you.
Does that provide some answers, Mayor?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So again, Councillor Charwood asked some great questions last time, and both the CEO and I were talking about whether or not we would, request a name change for this particular reserve. Now, the reason that we called it that is because a major of the funding comes from that water license, but it does, kind of seem misleading on, who gets to, be able to draw from this, and why is it different. And anyway, I don't know right now whether or not it's something that council is bothered by, but I just thought it was a great point. I think it could be maybe a bit confusing, and so we just wanted to put that out there, that we may be looking at trying to find a better name for this than the water license reserve. Just in the fact that we called it that because that's where the majority of the funding comes from is maybe not the best name of the reserve. But as an aside, just where we go on this side is you will start on in 2021 at the very top. You can see that we had about close to $2 million in this particular reserve, and there had been a pretty healthy request, as there always are. And the other place that we find on this particular reserve is that we do transfer out. So it can be confusing because you're like, well, how come I've got capital expenditures of 1.3, but also transfers of 660? And so what we tend to do here internally, sort of a movement of funds. If you're saying I'm going to buy these servers, and we've got the water license reserve that funds that, and that's a capital expenditure that's going to go right against this reserve. However, down at the bottom, you can see that there's some allocations that we say we've kind of got the expense for getting the facility upgrades at one of our buildings in the building. And how is that going to be funded? Well, we're going to use water license reserve. So rather than break up a project that might have multiple fundings, we will leave that as, like I say, a building project. But then we may bring in money from the water license reserve, money from community works funds. And so that's why you would see that number of what transfers are. And you can see down below where we've got places where we are doing that. one key component here is if you look at that hydro, you'll see that close to 700,000 in 2021 coming from that work done in our previous councils on fighting for that water license change when they built the BC Hydro built the hydro dam there, and so that funding comes to the city, and this is where we use it. And then you'll also see that we've got it's growing because it's built on sort of the price that we pay for power to Fortis. So you can see that that is growing over time as Fortis's prices change. Back, I'm going to say at least 6 or 7 years ago, the council of the day, because this was getting pressure, as you can see, it will ebb and flow with pressure, is that we have an ongoing contribution from our operating funds, from our taxation that goes into this reserve, as well as the operating, and we also have some debt servicing tax comes in, and we do pay some debt service on the loans on some of our outstanding debt. The other portion there, it's kind of small and it's ongoing, but the one thing that we did commit to was that when council agreed to fund the capital upgrade of the Colos location, that a portion of those fiber rentals that we would garner from that work would come back into this water license reserve, because this is where we funded a chunk of doing that work from. So we're trying to again have those funds go back into the reserve because it funded that work. And so my hope is too is that if we're able to be successful in garnering more and more of clients in there, that this would be something that we could increase as time goes on.
So Councillor Luxembourg has a question.
Okay.
Thanks, John. So Colin, before we move past it or too far past it, the
Yes.
name of the water license reserve, I want to just quickly speak to that.
Okay.
If my understanding is correctly, effectively what we're talking about is a Kootenay River. It's something that's coming from Kootenay River, Kootenay Lake. The entire watershed is delivering that income. We're in partnership with it through again, if I'm understanding correctly, through our dam. But really, it's a climactic engine that we're sort of bleeding off from. So if we wanted to get really clear about what this reserve is that the income from this reserve is, it's really directly related to the ecosystem in which we sit. And I think as a general move to sort of 2030, 2040 vision in which we sort of reestablished our partnership with the local watershed or the local ecosystem, we could start renaming things so they're not so abstracted from really where that energy ultimately is coming from, which is sort of that climactic cycle and, delivering water from the regional watershed down Kootenay River to generate power through Nelson Hydro. So I would ask council to consider that we rename it something like the Kootenay River Reserve, just really sort of referencing where ultimately the energy that is being translated into income is coming from. So I put that out to council as something to consider, or a perspective to apply to considering how we call these things. Names are important. So.
And I hear you. And so you got the dry account that just wanted to call it like the general reserve, just to so we sort of blanded it so that we wouldn't confuse people. So, but I appreciate that, Councillor Lautenberg, with what your thoughts are. And again, council can debate that question. Does anyone have any questions here? I just wanted to pick up certain places, like again for the library and police and fire, and certainly in parks. One of the big ones in 20. Yep.
I think Councillor Page had a question.
Okay. Thank you.
I love the theme of that, Rick. It's great to tie it together. I think, however, that this reserve should reflect what we intend to spend the money on. We can still bring in all those branding values and other things when we are very clear about what we're spending on. And I think that's kind of maybe what, and Nicole's here, so she can certainly touch on it, but I think that was part of it. It's just the purpose from the bylaws, capital works, maintenance, extensions, or renewals of existing capital works. So We could certainly have something like historic water reserve in there somewhere as a subtext, but we should just rename it to something so it's clear that that's its intent and that's what it's there for. And when it shows up on a line item, people are like, oh, that's that reserve from the historic Kootenai River water license. I don't know what the naming might be, but I think it should describe what we're supposed to be using it for. And if we need to revisit that bylaw and discuss what those purposes are, that's a more fulsome discussion that I think is worth having if we decide we need to have it.
Thank you. Colin, I think it might be worth a bit of a refresher as to how we got that water license reserve in the first place.
Well, I'm going to pass that over to our hydro expert, CIO Corbin. He knows that at the back of his hand.
There's a bit of a story to it.
Yeah, I can quickly hear. You're going to hear more about this on Tuesday. But yeah, effectively, when the city had applied for additional water licenses on the Kootenai River, which they were basically promised, and then the government chose to go ahead and build the Kootenai Canal and basically allocate all the rest of the licenses on the on the Kootenai River to BC Hydro. City Council had a long-standing dispute with the government and BC Hydro on that. We lost generation that we had originally, and we lost the opportunity to have additional generation. And ultimately, the water rights agreement was negotiated, which gave the city this additional 265 CFS, cubic feet per second of water allocation. And that's council of the day chose to use this revenue source that it had negotiated and use it to support the sort of the capital program of the city. And I can tell you, it's a godsend, or all these projects you see here would be in taxation and not funded. And many municipalities out there really struggle with replacing capital. We wouldn't have the parks, we wouldn't have many things that we have today without this source of funding. So that's that was the foresight of council back in 1898 to get into the secure water licenses, and a long fight and significant time and legal fees and political action by previous councils to finally get that compensation for that lost generation.
Thank you. I just want to throw this out now. Colin, you're flipping to a new page, right?
Before we did that, I just wanted to go through a couple of the lines in particular.
We have Councillor Lautenberg with a question.
Yeah, so when we clear up this page, maybe we'll have a 10-minute break. We just want to throw that out. So Councillor Lautenberg, go ahead.
Thanks, John, and I'll try not to take too much time on this as we move through to break. I appreciate Councillor Page's point about describing our funds or reserves to what their purpose is. But as a general principle, I just want to sort of return to this idea that we've talked about the value of looking at natural assets and developing a larger sort of climate and environmental mitigation and adaptation plan over the next 10, 20 years in Nelson Next, and as a general principle. And I think the province and the Fed also really starting to, given the serious flooding and fires we've had over this past year, that we really need to evolve as governments our understanding about our relationship with our local ecosystem. And part of that sort of redefinition or definition of our relationship and how we work as a municipality with the natural assets or the local ecosystem, it's a progressive process. And one of those things is to recognize that this fund, for example, income that we're bringing into the city to do our parks and all of these things is not coming from the dam itself. And I know this is an obvious point. That dam is just a part of a broader system in which that energy translating into income. And so one of the best practices is to really start to acknowledge, so that it then will trickle upwards into planning, what the bigger system that we're a part of is. And in that case, it is a sort of a climactic system as well as an ecological system that is driving those cubic feet across that dam, generating power. So I just want to keep us on track to be thinking about how we do our planning starts with like how we call out these relationships that we tend to forget. If you don't name it, the water license reserve, you're just thinking, oh, we should keep our entire focus on the dam, making sure that that asset is continuing to generate power, and then funding projects that, again, sort of keep us at arm's length from the true source of that energy, which is that climactic cycle. So kind of a step towards, building a more integrated regional relationship with our ecosystem, I think is it's important, and it kind of starts with this small step potentially of renaming and recognizing what the bigger system is that is generating this income. So I just want to kind of push that a little bit harder, not asking for a decision now, but sort of keep that in the cycle of our thinking, that we are in the process of recognizing and calling out what this bigger system we're a part of is. So thanks for giving me that little bit of time to say that.
That would be a great one to bring up at the provincial level, because it's the BC hydro dams that are utilizing 90% of the water in that river, and and we get really nothing in return for that as the city of Nelson.
Right,
Thank you. Okay, onward and upward.
Don,
Oh, sorry, Keith, go ahead.
I'll be quick. It's a fine point. It might be a little expansive. But when we do look at the bylaw, we may want to get specific about the allowable uses within the bylaw for that reserve, and do they need to be expanded? Just simply from the existing building standpoint, even just adding in things like natural assets and knowing that the services that they can deliver would seem to be an appropriate thing for consideration by council.
And just to be clear to the public out there, Parks is a significant drawer of this water license reserve, which is all natural assets. So, and all our management of all our boulevard trees, all those things. This goes a long ways to the work we don't do along the waterfront. All those things are funded by this water license reserve. So, but it would, we can look at being clear on that of where it's funding those type of projects in addition, because I don't want the impression be left that this is just bricks and mortar. This is, like I said, almost 100% of capital on the park side comes out of this reserve.
Thank you.
We tend to augment that.
Thank you. So on the naming of the reserve, I must admit, I've always found it a bit sort of confusing over the years. However, let's have that conversation at a different day and stay sort of focused on the budget side of it. But a good point. Should we have a quick break, or are we okay?
If I can have maybe 2 minutes, we can finish this page.
2 minutes, and then we have a quick break.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So again, you'll notice if you were to go back to the capital sheet, and there's sort of the capital projects itself and then the funding component down below. And so this is where, if you're looking at the capital expenditures, you'll see, whether the different parties, but it may not be funding like the $400,000 worth of information systems. You don't see all of that being drawn from here. And that's because we have relationships through the equipment reserve, for example, where we're charging out the departments for the use of computers. That goes into the reserve, and then we're using that equipment reserve to help fund those kind of internal charges for sort of like your hardware and those sort of things. Most of these will be software components inside information services that you're seeing going across the bottom. And the other one, I just wanted to know why parks in particular for 2022, we have that's where the council and previous councils, being you guys, but previous years, we had decided to draw on the water license reserve to put our portion of funding towards the current price and project of the pier. So that's why if you're seeing that at that level, about 900,000 of that amount, it relates to that. And then as CEO Cormac spoke to, it does pick up a number of other capital projects that we have. So again, what I also wanted to draw your eye to is the closing balance, and you'll see that again we've got a good healthy balance expected in there again for the beginning of 2022. We do have a significant draw looking on it, and then as your years go out, you'll notice that it does grow. And I just want to also caution, because it's usually each year that the departments, for example, police, the library, or fire, or otherwise, that we don't have a lot of kind of capital projects. I noticed in parks going out past 2022, we seem to be kind of focused on what's happening in the current year. So I think it's good to see that it's a healthy reserve, but I would also make council recognize that as we go to next year's budget and the next year after that, that this tends to get populated on, okay, well, we need this or we need that. And this is an area that, again, if we've got a good reserve going in here, that this is a place that, again, council should be proud of, that we've got this type of a funding going in to be able to fund the ongoing capital demands of our community. As he noted, very, very, very few municipalities even have a source of funding or have even made the decision of taking out of their own operating budgets, like that 200,000 that the previous council had decided to do to augment what was happening into this reserve, because we saw how much pressure was under. So again, it's a good place, has a broad ability for people to come and apply for it, and I think it's in good shape. And if that's all, Mayor, we can take a 10-minute break.
Thank you very much, Colin. Okay, folks, the heck time is at 10:07. So see you in 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks, Colin, for bringing that topic back.
Okay. Thanks for raising it, because yes. Sometimes you get your
Rick and Jesse are disappeared. Do you mind if we close that door there? Excuse me. Open that door so there's a trams. Okay, I think we'll get going here. Colin, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. So again, in that same vein, and it's sort of unfortunate in these particular medium, I can't kind of have both up at the same time and can, double screen sort of thing. But in the same way that we discussed with the reserves, these are the kind of blue sections. If you're looking at the capital, we've got the capital requests, and then they kind of funnel down to a total that are funded from different sources. And so we try to have sort of a bit of a detail here on some of the projects we're going to do down below on the capital projects reserve. But I've also wanted to talk about kind of what we're seeing, and we still need to come back to council with sort of an update on what we're seeing for the financial viability of this particular reserve and the demands that are being placed on it. When I look at 2021 and 2022, we weren't far off of what we expected for coin revenue. So again, just to backtrack a little bit, this reserve is mainly funded from parking meter revenue that we receive. And from that, it is to fund most of our transportation capital. So not just paving, although paving tends to be a portion, but sidewalk renewal, active transportation, lighting, and sidewalks. I already said that, I think. But so it's key that sometimes it's like, oh, you just take this money and you do it for cars. Well, actually, no, we are using this for other components as well. The place where some of these projects land, I think are important too. So we've kind of got as an example the transit exchange, how that will be funded, and what project that is, or how because the top part is sort of the funding, and then down below is the actual projects that we're looking at doing, whether or not that's the paving and sidewalks, the additional sidewalk improvements. We've talked about the storm sewer upgrades and how that was prevalent to ongoing work that we're doing, and but that's not the big one. It's this big project right here down at the bottom where you can see out in 2024, 2025, and 2026, where we've got a close to a $9 million ask that we will be applying. Council had given their resolution, I believe, or maybe it's coming up on the 8th here, so that we can send a letter off as part of our application that council supports that major storm infrastructure upgrade to again assist with mitigating climate change and some of the heavy downpours that we are seeing, and our system's ability to handle that. So we are working through that. So again, not just coin revenue, but we also do have grants and other funding coming in here. This one here too, is in a good healthy spot. One major reason for that has been the allocation from the Community Works Fund Reserve, and again, it will be something that we'll look at. And there are only, the Community Works Fund is not a wide open grant that we can just spend as we like. There are certain parameters around it, and you can't buy vehicles with it, you can't buy fire trucks with it. Although I did notice that a big change for the requirements on this funding is that they are now allowing for I guess, kind of funding. You're allowed to use Community Works funds to look into fire halls, again, whether or not in building them or planning them, but also even actually in building them, which is a significant change. But again, mostly the idea on the Community Works Fund is that that's the gas tax that we pay at the pump as individuals, and then that flows to the feds, who then have a program in BC to fund it back to the province, who then does not only ongoing funding that comes to our city that helps us with, the idea was for initiatives for cleaner air, cleaner water, and they have expanded it somewhat because not all communities could do that. So they, allow for transportation infrastructure, cultural buildings, and infrastructure, as well as sports. So they've kind of increased the amount of usages for that, which has been very helpful for the city. But this is a place where you'll see an allocation from that reserve coming in here to assist us when we're trying to do some upper bigger capital projects, because you can use it on sidewalks and paving and active transportation type of things. And so this is where you'll see that coming in here. I don't know if anyone has any questions on these. A couple of major ones that we're very excited as staff to deal with in particular is, and we've talked about it already in the capital side, but is the replacement of the works yard fuel tanks, getting them from out of the ground and then having them above. And we were, after many, many years, I'm going to say over 10, that we have a proponent in place, and that hopefully that work is going to start here in the near future. So that's a major one for city and staff. Transit exchange, again, waiting on whether our application will be approved by the feds and the province. And so we're waiting to hear back from that, but that should be finding out that in the next couple of months. And again, idea being here is that you would do planning if we were successful, we would do planning in 2022, and then the plan to be to actually make the upgrades in 2023. And not sure if anyone has any questions. One other note that I wanted to point out is this line here, debt levy, and then debt repayment. Yeah. So what I think is important is that council is aware that where we have budgeted if we were successful on getting the grant for the significant storm infrastructure upgrade, that we would use borrowing to be able to fund that sort of, it would be something that would, hopefully last us for a very, very long time. And right now we are looking at that would likely come to council. If you're doing that, again, these would be on that, I believe it's 80 dollars in around there. And the amount that we would need to borrow out of that 9 million would be approximately 3, so I guess 25% of it. And so if we borrow that, we need to repay that. And so we've now kind of said, all right, well, if we're going to repay that, we've got a debt repayment line, and then we also have an expectation, which is common for municipalities to go out and get an alternative borrowing process so that we can ask the taxpayer to help pay for this project. Should be a 50, 60, 70 year kind of lifetime, and have where we've got this particular decision would be over a 20 year to borrow that 3 million that the city would need to match or to have our share of the grant application would come from borrowing. So I just wanted to put that out there. Again, if we don't get the grant, then again, we wouldn't move forward with the project and we wouldn't need the borrowing. But again, this is how I have presented that when we get there, this is how we would fund it. In some aspects...
Colin, Councillor Lockenberg has his hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Colin, my question or conversation will probably open up a discussion around borrowing. So you might want to finish your point, and then we come back to that because it's related to what Kevin shared with us around inflation. So I'll.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, absolutely. The only thing that I want council to be aware of is unless we do a 5-year and under borrowing, we do have to go out to the electorate. And again, I'm on side, I think, of where you're going to talk, Councillor Lautenberg, and the one caveat I guess I have is that I think all our governments have decided that's the same decision, that we should just borrow as much as possible because inflation will mean that it doesn't cost us as much, but at some point in time we need to pay it back. And so that's the only thing. I would really want to think that we're going to be way more responsible for that. And again, when I look at overall the numbers and even borrowing and what it would cost us to pay back, basically 2.7 million on almost 9 million. I'm not seeing that as a risk, but I'll let you go on. But that's my only statement on the borrowing thing.
Yeah, so for the benefit of the public, I think what we want to be clear about is the reason why borrowing now looks attractive versus imagining it in 6 months to a year from now is that your principal technically, maybe not technically, but relatively speaking, declines in high inflation. So if your interest rate is lower than the rate of inflation, the size of your principal is less in the future than it is today. So it makes sense from that perspective. Also, interest rates going up, or if they're projected to go up, you want to lock in some borrowing now at a lower interest rate so you don't pay those higher interest rates in the future. So there's two related reasons why we would want to borrow now versus waiting. In part also is potentially locking in some of these projects like our storm sewer upgrade might put us in a position if we borrow now to have access to contractors or work that we may not have in a future environment. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but that might be another reason why we would want to sort of take the initiative today versus waiting. The other thing, so that's my comment, and Colin, I guess a question for you or for Kevin would be two questions. The first is, would something like the transit exchange be something else we would want to borrow for if we didn't get the grant, or if that grant was delayed and we sort of anticipated we would get it on the second intake in, say, 2023 potentially? So we should just borrow now, start later, get the grant, and then use that money to pay off the loan. I don't know if that's even possible. So I guess that relates to my second question. Can you, in anticipation of grants, borrow today and then apply for the grant to then pay off what you've borrowed, to get the project started. Is that possible?
Well, maybe I can try to cover a few of your items there. So, number one, I hear what you're saying, and that is certainly something that we did for Nelson Hydro. Back in the day, we borrowed $6 million and put it into the reserve. And kind of like you said, locked it at a pretty decent rate, which then has kind of allowed us to do the capital upgrades. And as you've noted, the interest rate has been low, and as inflation goes up, when we got that, we had that money available to do work, and so yes, we have done that in that particular situation. Certainly, we had a business case to be able to do that. I have not put forward today that we would borrow in our financial plan like this year and then sort of put that into the different reserves. So I've kind of, you're right, mine is a bit more of a plan of like we get the grant, then we get the borrowing and work from there. So we haven't gone that way to kind of borrow based on having funds to do capital projects. Interesting idea. Like I said, it's not, like I said, we did that in hydro, so it is something that council could consider. To move on to your next question about BC Transit, so twofold there. One, we do kind of borrow from BC Transit if we're going to move forward on the transit exchange. So they're covering 80% of the cost. The 20% that we would be responsible for, they're saying that they would just take that and amortize it over, say, 10 years in our current AOA. So they're kind of holding on to that mode of borrowing, that we wouldn't have to go through the alternative borrowing process, which where you need to get the approval from electorate. So on something like that. So that's one that is there. Now, the risk part is that if we go and borrow and do the project and then apply for the grant and they're always big on, well, no, it doesn't work that way. You can't kind of, hey, yes, we paid for this. Can you now grant fund it? They're very, very big sticklers, and we've seen that in a number of projects where we can't do anything to see, because if you do start anything on this project before you get the nod on the grant, then those become non-qualifying costs. So they do really try to hold you there to do that. But it's an interesting philosophy, and again, not lost on us that that's what we did for Nelson Hydro, because we saw the reserve was in a low spot, and we wanted some big capital upgrades, again, whether it was Mill Street or Granite, all those, and we sort of allowed it, and again with an ongoing funding source as well from Hydro going into that. But at the time, we just noticed that we were really in a tough spot and had some big capital, and so did do exactly that.
So Colin or Rick, maybe Colin and I can go away and look at, sort of what those capital projects are out over the next 5 years, and kind of what debt we're projecting based on, some of the grants we have. Because I think it is worth a really wholesome discussion. Do we go out and do that? My gut feeling is we have enough capital coming down the pipe that we're going to need to borrow at some point in time over that period of time. So doing it now, I don't, might make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
If all our projects were dependent on grants and we weren't going to do anything unless we got that, then we might look at this differently. But I think there's enough larger projects in there that we don't have reserves to be able to fund them, or withdraw down our reserve to such a small level that we'd lose our flexibility on responding to new opportunities there. So I think it's a good one that we can look at, but I think let us look at sort of what those what that borrowing is and what those type of projects are, and we can bring back something that council can see what that relationship is and where they want to go with that. As Colin said, we have to go to the electorate, the AIP process, but I think if we, have a good, solid, capital plan going forward, we've been successful in the past. And our general borrowing amount or levels are really, really small. So we do certainly have capacity.
Just a quick follow-up, John, if I may, on that.
Yeah.
So Kevin, or Colin, or both of you, just a quick question. When let's in anticipation of these projects, and let's say we did borrow a fund and to put into reserve, are we locked into how we invest that capital? Could we sort of beat our interest rate by some smart investments, given that sort of inflation's going up? We've locked in this low 2.2%, and then we're getting a return on that capital of say 3 or 4 or 5%. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. I think someone brought up, we leased some of our assets back probably 10-ish years ago, or 10, 15. I've been here long enough that I keep losing decades now. That's exactly what we did. We went out and borrowed, on leases against our assets, and we didn't need that money. We put that money into investment, and we're making a bigger return on the interest that we were actually receiving on that money than we were paying on this lease fee. So, yeah, in that type of market, we can lock in. We can, while that money sits before these projects, we'd probably do better on the investment side than we are on paying the interest on it.
Yeah, there's some potential there. But
one of the things we want to keep in mind, though, is, of course, the reserves have been what has created the stability that we've got within the organization over the years. And from myself personally, I'm very much in favor of keeping that sort of stability and our ability to be resilient. That allows us to not be sort of on the fringes of potentially being caught flat-footed. But the other piece too, though, around the, as Councillor Lochtenberg mentioned, the storm sewer, but I think we have to look at these projects on why would you be doing the storm sewer? And there's a number of reasons, of course, and we've had a bit of a rough outline of some of the challenges around our storm sewer capacity, for instance, in flash floods, the ability for our sewage treatment plant to handle that additional surface water that ends up down there. So when you look at storm sewer, we're actually looking at the sewage treatment plant as well. And that's one of the things that sort of kept us fairly stable over the years, is the fact that we did good planning around these projects, and we just didn't do storm sewer just because we want to do storm sewer. And then that ties into what was mentioned a couple of years ago, was the potential upgrades of Baker Street to get our whole infrastructure under Baker Street up to code, and to divert buildings that are along Baker, as an example, from putting their storm into our sanitary. So when we look at these line items around storm sewer work, there's a bigger model there. There's a bigger ticket item that we need to be taken into account. So that's also important, Colin, for us to realize that as well. Like the storm sewer upgrade is a major project, but when you tack on the sewage treatment plant to it, the upgrade to Baker Street, it's in the multi-millions of dollars, far in excess of what we're looking at on this sheet here.
Yeah, and I guess one way I would look at it is, CAO Cormac spoke to, we anticipate that we're going to need to borrow for the sewage treatment plant, and we've got that in the budget to be able to fund that borrowing cost. Now again, you borrow anticipation of that while you get a rate that's very low, and you kind of even put it into its reserve. Now again, I want to caveat that we do have limitations on borrowing when we do with the MFA and that sort of thing. So it is, kind of being that AAA, it's got to be a bond. So again, yes, as interest rates rise, yes, we would see a lift on some of that. But if you're wanting to use the funding, you couldn't really maybe lock it into longer term. So if some of the short term stuff may come up a bit, but while you're waiting, but I would think unlikely Councillor Lautenberg, that we would get in that 3-4%. Is it possible? Sure, but I'm thinking more than likely it would be low for a couple of years as things ramp up. Yes, it could get there, but at that time, hopefully you're thinking that you're using the money itself, but those are all good things to consider. But it is something, if you look at what's coming with the sewage treatment plant, as the mayor said, about whether it's, there's a couple other projects that we've talked about here that even right off the bat, if we find out we're successful with a civic grant, we talked about borrowing there. So there's some things that are imminent here, and that may be something that we have to come back to council and say, you know what, we're going to go in, even if we get our plan here ready almost, it wouldn't be a surprise that before we have to and bring it to council for final approval, that would be a place where we still have that opportunity to say, look, we're going to go and borrow a bunch of money and fill in a couple of these reserves because we know that we're going to need borrowing. For example, we know in the next couple of months that our vendor's supposed to come forward with our wastewater master plan. So I think that will also speak and give us a sense on some of that. So, and just always remember with council, the one challenge is timing. It's not like we can just walk into the bank and say we want to get $10 million. If we want to get $10 million, we have to go through quite a process, and it's quite a lengthy process to get inside what's going to happen with MFA and the province. And they have a couple of different ways of stick handling things too. So even if you get the funding available in the envelope, you don't necessarily have to lock into their sinking fund sort of thing. You can kind of almost keep it outside of that and draw on it. So sometimes it's a case of getting approval to have the funding, but then there's 2 annual timeframes when they go out to the market. And like I said, it would be unlikely that we could, well, I think it's impossible that we can't make the spring borrowing. So then you're looking at the fall borrowing. And you're right, as things kind of tick along here, that number may change, and we had to be cognizant of that. Although when MFA provides their numbers to us, they're already thinking ahead of what the rate is going to be. So I think see how Cormac had popped up there. I think it was 2.2 or something like that over the next 10 years, right? So,
Colin, I just want to stay on this for a minute or two because this is really important. At least it is to me that we're financially stable, and we're actually we've had very good processes over the years around planning and looking at and I think Kevin touched on it a little bit there too. It'd be really good to come back with a document that shows here's some of the commitments we have in front of us going forward, so that we're thoughtful as a council in selecting what projects that actually are going to make a real significant difference. As an example, the storm sewer, in my opinion, for what it's worth, if I had a list of items on the board, where would I be putting my money? That's where I'd be putting it, because how we manage that storm sewer has a huge impact on how we scale the sewage treatment plant. We talked about the sewage treatment plant when this council was first elected, and we were talking in numbers of 20 million. But that was scaling a sewage treatment plant to, yes, manage future growth, but also handle a lot of that excess water that we were getting through the storm sewer. And in the last 3 years, we've realized, all of us, I think, that these flash floods are not going away. And that, we have to start thinking in terms of, when we're doing one project, how is it impacting another? So if you were to put, as an example, the best bang for your buck on climate change right now, or the changing climate, I would say a storm sewer would have knocked the Civic Centre off at least of what on my grid, if you understand what I mean, because I don't have the real confidence that we can meet the targets we set for the Civic Centre, even with the retrofit. But I do know that if we did the right thing around storm sewer, we'd be checking off many more boxes around being able to adapt to climate change. And I think, Kevin, your suggestion about putting some of those projects out there in a list, that gives council an opportunity to look at them from, now we have a new lens. We have a lens that we have to start using now that we weren't using 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And I think those projects would sort of maybe changed, maybe not, I don't know. But from my perspective, I think some of them definitely would. They'd drop lower on the scale of best bang for your buck, not only for the taxpayer, but for the community, the greater community, and an opportunity to adapt to the changing climate that we're facing. That's just my 2 cents.
Yep. No, some very good points. And again,
Colin, why don't we,
I think it's, yeah, but I think
don't
part of
we-
it.
Yeah, let's
Yep.
put that together and we'll bring it back because we could spend a lot of time on this
Yeah.
discussion.
Especially because you might be saying, hey, we may not need it for 2 or 3 years, but if in 2 or 3 years the rate's now at 4% versus 2%, we'll do some calculations on, kind of that kind of risk component of it. Yep. Okay. Did anyone else? Again, we've kind of got a similar trying to keep the balance in a place where it. Is that we've got funds coming in and we've got some ebbs and flows, but we're trying to stay, like as the mayor said, in a healthy place. That if something comes up, that we can handle that within the reserve in the same way that because we've been doing well with our reserves and keeping these balances here, we're also hoping that they help us a bit on our interest income, so they come a little bit more self-funding as well. So that's one of the things that we've had some challenges over the last number of years, just on such a low interest environment. So as it does tend to look like it's going to increase, we will, because we have been good stewards of the money, use the reserves, but also have a healthy reserve that should also benefit us into the future.
Colin, just one more thing I wanted to add, if it's okay.
Yep.
My concern going forward for future councils is, and of course they can make their own decisions, but is as an example, on the news this morning, Chilliwack's going to need $2 billion because of the floods that happened. That's just Chilliwack, right? To help them upgrade dikes because of the flooding and do some work. The pressure that's going to be, the pressure that will be on senior levels of government going forward is going to be huge. The financial debt load is massive. And I just want to put the $2 billion into perspective. When I was on the FCM board, the federal government allocated $10 billion for all of Canada for infrastructure. So when you think of one area that wants $2 billion of that doesn't, and that's not counting everybody else. I'm not so sure that qualifying for government grants going forward is going to be as easy as it has been in the past. So we're going to have to be very thoughtful about the projects that we really want to focus on, that's going to make a difference to our community and actually meet the mandate of what we're here for in the first place as a council and mayor. So Keith, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just listening to the conversation around the table, there's some things I agree with, and I really appreciate that some have put their glasses on to the pressures that have been becoming more and more evident over the coming years and will continue to become more exaggerated as we go forward. So in the context of this borrowing conversation, I think we have projects in the pipeline that come from good planning and where we can find financial tools to achieve efficiencies. I have support of doing that work and looking at that work and seeing where those can be brought. I do think to the point that money is easy to get now, and governments have been willing to spend it to invest in the communities and in our jurisdictions, there will be a shift at some point or a swing back, as these things always have a tendency to do. I think in that context, it's really important that whether it's a municipal building or planning for capacity for the sewage plant or doing municipal works up and down Baker Street, that we make sure we have the planning in place to inform what we intend to do, and that we are keeping on top of that and not creating the other kinds of debt that exist outside of just the fiscal debts. We do not want to create capital renewal debts. We do not want to have technical debts as we're chewing through now with COVID and catching up on the kinds of adoptions we need to to get behind us. So I think what will serve the community the most into the future is making sure that we keep doing the work that needs to be done now, so we're not passing those on until tomorrow, because our ability to do those works in the future is always going to be up in the air as competing priorities come to bear. Because I do believe, like we've seen on the coast this past fall and winter, that there are going to be other areas of our country that are going to be hit by unknowns, and the focus of higher levels of government on those areas are going to mean that we are going to be sitting waiting to hear back on grants like we are now, because it is going to become an ongoing distraction into the future. So let's do as much as we can now when it comes to taking care of what we already have and making sure we're taking care of the capacity for what services people need. And it's going to be a difficult thing to swallow and hard work for everyone to do, but I think it's just simply work we have to do as long as we are following good planning. And whatever financial efficiencies we can get, and we put it into the strong hands of our financial team here, then by all means, let's figure out what kind of financial tools we can devise to make sure that it is as cost effective as possible.
Yes, thank you.
All right, we'll come back. We'll do some borrowing math fun tricks and see what we can do. See what we can figure out a plan. Okay, I'm gonna. Yep.
On this one, again, I just want to point out, like, the parking meter revenue that we receive in the city of Nelson per capita is light years ahead of every other community outside, probably the Victoria, Vancouver. It's like, if we didn't have this source of revenue, again, our taxes would be either significantly higher, or our roads and all these projects this is funding would not be happening. So again, it's it's just an acknowledgement of the revenue streams that this city has created, and this, with the supports of council both now and in the past, of we're, like I said, on a capital renewal and reserves basis, I would put us up to any community across this country.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. On that note, thank you. Just before we leave this one, you'll notice that under the coin here, that we were pretty close to what we budgeted, but I also didn't make too much of a jump in 2022. One of the reasons being that I'm wanting to be conservative on this number, depending on what kind of summer we have, kind of fire season we have. Also, just with the assisting our great restaurant industry here with being able to allow for the expanded patio. And I think that's also, it's kind of, all of those are playing into a lower revenue than we had pre-COVID. So just wanting council to be aware that I'm being conservative here.
Thank you.
So the equipment placement reserve, this was one of those questions that I believe, it was a good tie-in, Mayor, with what you were talking about. And so how this works at the city is you can see that we do have a healthy balance, but all it takes is a couple of our major pieces of equipment needing to be replaced, and that does drop. And how we apply this is that if we use a truck or a loader, say, on doing a capital project, or when Hydro is out using their trucks to put some poles in, or trying to string line and whatnot, when a person has their payroll sheet, they also put in the equipment that they were using and how many hours on their timesheet. And from there, we have a rate that we charge out. Now, that rate that we charge has a two-factor to it. We have part of the rate is going to cover the maintenance, oil, fuel, insurance, etc. but we also try to set the rate so that there is sort of the amortized cost of the vehicle that is over and above. And so at the end of the day, as we charge out all our equipment to all these different jobs and to snow plowing and doing parks or a cemetery tractor, all of those numbers get charged out. And then we look at what the value was as far as the maintenance and the, again, the fuel, et cetera. And when we have that, whatever the difference is between sort of what we charge the equipment out at and what the actual cost to maintain and fuel and insure the vehicles, this is where we get this contribution that comes. And so we then take that amount of what's happened with equipment charges, and then we then put that into the reserve. So we kind of take that from our operating and we put that cash wise into the reserve. And then down below each year, we are, purchasing mostly vehicle equipment, but there has been a few other items. Actually, IT is again the same sort of thing where we charge out the computer that is at my desk, and it goes into that fund as well. And this is how we fund our equipment, and it's extremely valuable to again have a place where we can say we need a new pickup truck. We don't have to, be too concerned about needing to replace equipment for all the valuable work that we do. And again, couple that with the great work that our public works mechanics do on maintenance, we really do see a good return when we do trade-ins. And so I think it's been a very good system here. And again, you're seeing a bit of a expectation in the next couple of years where we've got a pumper truck and we've got a line truck and we've got an HVAC vehicles, and they're expensive pieces of equipment. We use them a lot or need to have them, and so it's great that we've got a fund to even continue in that manner of renewal and upkeep of our equipment. The other part of that is that this will be the place where, as we move into that green trend, that we're having funds available to help us also purchase those vehicles and again cut down on our carbon footprint. I don't know if there's any questions on this one. If not, I'm going to move to the next slide.
Colin, just a comment on that I think is worth keeping in mind. And this sort of reflects throughout our budget when you talk about reserves, etc. When I first got on council here, and I'm not taking the glory for this because the council and mayors of the day were all involved, we were in a patch and repair mode on the equipment side. And, in the last 20 years or so, 15 in particular, we've built that inventory up to the point now where you can see on paper here, as Colin mentioned, how we charge equipment out, how we manage it, how we recycle it and renew it as we go forward has really paid significant dividends, not only to us, as a group here, but to the community as a whole, and in particular the employees. They have the best equipment to work with, and of course it's helped them speed up projects and get work done in a more timely manner. So that sort of mandate that councils have had has paid significant dividends in so many different areas, and it's definitely worth staying on that path.
That's brilliant, actually.
Thank you.
And just as a note here, we've kind of kept this flat, this allocation, but I do think that this is something maybe in the next year or so we also need to look out into the future, just as I think we get a bit of squeeze on. I just drove by the pump today and it's at 157 a liter. And again, may having to look at our charge out rates and also as prices of vehicles go up, we're not no inflationary lift on this right now, and we've been able to do well. And again, interest income that we're earning has been helpful. So, but this is something I think that in the next little while, we just need to look at what this contribution is and how is it going to look into the future. We look good right now, but I know that it's something that council, we as finance will bring forward, but something we should consider.
And just to build on the mayor's point, not only, as Colin mentioned, it's the net that after our expenses that go into that reserve, and by having good equipment and well maintained, like when I first got here, it was I would suspect the maintenance side of it was quite significant with all the the repair costs that we had with the equipment that was at at its end of its life and was costing more to maintain it than it was what was worth. But we didn't have the reserves to replace that equipment back in those days. So I think that reduced maintenance costs creates more contributions to the reserve, which kind of becomes self-fulfilling as well.
Totally agree. Okay, the building reserve. And this is one that I think about, with Manager Sinstadt that coming on and us recognizing that we needed to be better at upgrading our buildings and being able to provide funding. We were able to get council to put $40,000 into a building reserve back, I want to say about 8 or 9 years ago. And again, as Manager Sinstadt came along and said, okay, we got to move this. We've got to, we're going to get the facility condition index. We're going to get some grants. We're going to, start taking on these buildings and becoming more proactive rather than reactionary. It's been twofold. One is that means it's cost us more money, but we know that, again, when we see his bubble graph and the plan and where we're moving and having someone dedicated to this, it has been valuable. And you'll now see that council did bump that up. That, again, another operating contribution, so taxation coming into this building reserve is now at $300,000. And again, another great story about not only did we make a good deal with buying this building and having a place. I think about how many employees we have and how expanded we are, but how we're a one-stop shop for being able to come to most government services, whether it's your service BC or come and pay your taxes at the city. That benefit to our resident and our business, is huge. The other side of that is that we actually have a net income that comes from the rent that we get and the expenses that we incur and the sharing of the maintenance and how we handle all of that we have been successful in the current year. Instead of the budgeted 180, and part of that's from some additional funding that we received for renting, is that we're able to put into the reserve $220,000 into the reserve for the building fund. So again, you buy this building, we have a place that we're now able to operate our, a significant number of employees. We have a rental, we have a net income. We take that net income, and then we, council at the time, a number of years ago, decided to put that net into the building reserve, because we knew that the $40,000 a year was just not doing it. Again, as we go down, you can see that we got money coming in from the Water License Reserve, the Community Works Fund. We've looked at borrowing. We have grants. And then you get to that capital expenditure component that, is pretty significant over the next number of years when you've got, yes, we had budgeted $5.6 million. Obviously, library and other grants were supposed to come in back, come with that. And, but at the end of the year, what did we get done? Well, we got the touchstones was a major component and a number of other projects. But you'll see that we've got $5 to $6 million outwards for the next number of years. And so in kind of, where the reserve sort of gets to, you'll notice that even in 2022, if everything goes as planned, that we're really going to be putting a lot of pressure on this reserve. It does, kind of fill up, as we talked about before, with some of the upfront borrowing. If we're going to be successful with some of these, library and other grants projects that we have, the Civic, so you can kind of see where we're balancing. But it's pretty tenuous as far as even after 2025 there. I must have missed a year, 2026, but we're in a pretty low number. But again, at least we have been successful in moving towards providing the proper funding and also having someone in place that helps us with our buildings. Is there any questions on this particular reserve? Okay.
I don't have a question.
The downtown waterfront.
Okay, I don't have a question, but it does sort of connect a little bit to that other sheet you've handed out earlier, the history of funding to major grant recipients.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that, Mayor.
Yeah. So.
So again, a little history on the Downtown Waterfront Reserve, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but just for public and for members of council, back in the day when we went to HST, we had to submit the not only the GST but the PST portion, because it was now HST, to the federal government. We don't charge PST now on the parking meters. We do have to to remit GST, but that savings itself is what created this kind of found money when they changed from from HST back to PST, which we didn't have to pay on parking meter revenue. And so we took this $90,000 a year because, again, needed a place to fund some of the the vibrancy of our downtown and our waterfront. And so we have been successful in using that, whether or not that's the public art that we see sort of replenished each year. And you can see there's a ongoing amount for 20,000 onto the future. We in the current year, we're going to lean on it to help us pay for the parking meters. We've been able to be successful, and I think lighting up our downtown and with our lighting. And again, too, we also used it last year to help fund the RDI program work that Selkirk was doing for us. You can see that it's in a good, healthy spot. We've got some, I think, good projects in 2022. But as we move forward, and whether or not we want to do things in our different parts of our downtown waterfront, that this is a place that we're able to fund it from. So. Okay, so this is, sorry, Councillor Page. I see your hand up.
This is a matter of best practice. Does it start to make any kind of sense to tag these to an inflationary increase, these allocations that are going on, given the pressures of I just see 90,000 kind of static going out into the future. Seems like we would want to start adjusting those.
Yeah, and I guess because it's based on the parking meter revenue, not the only concern, but that's where I think that we historically have every number of years sort of do a lift to that rate. It's not probably not the best to go, hey, now it's not $1.25 an hour, it's now $1.28 or then 32 sort of things. So it seems to be that when council, this council, another council decides, hey, this is getting under pressure, or I think that we need to reflect inflation on parking meter revenues, that's when you probably go from, well, now it's now $1.25 to $1.50, and then of course that would be the relationship that we would likely lift this amount as well. Councillor Page.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Okay, just going back to the Community Works Fund. You can see here where we've leaned on it heavily, or we're leaning on it heavily in the next number of years. We did this year as well. In 2021, there was an increase to what the semi-annual grant was. They basically double paid. Part of that, again, being that decision by the feds in the province that they wanted to provide additional funding to sort of kickstart the economy, which of course it's sort of not only kickstarted, but we're red hot. And you can see in the current year that this particular project has some expenditures that are, kind of right on the bottom line, and then some, as we've talked about before, where we're allocating to, say, the capital reserve. So we've got the capital project, and we sort of bring in the transfer of the funding instead of saying, hey, let's put in 50% of paving into here and 50% in capital works. We sort of like keep all the transportation kind of cost in one, and then if it qualifies, then we can use Community Works Fund. We kind of transfer it over to cover the cost of that. We have to report on it each year, and then we get audited at times on our projects. They want to know how many square meters of sidewalk we've improved, or questions like that. So there's an ongoing process that goes. You'll notice that after 2023, that the number stays the same. Now we are in a place where we know what the amount is for 2022 and 2023. They then revisit it, and this is one that they themselves sort of do an inflationary factor. And again, I don't know what relationship the tax is. So if the liter of gas is now $1.56, does that mean that the gas tax went from A to Z? And is that what kind of allows them to increase what this is on an inflationary basis? But at the end of next, or I would suspect in the next 9 to 12 months, that they will probably present to us kind of what they expect the funding band with I would expect an inflationary factor going on the amount of the grant that we get. Okay, so those are the high level, like the majority, if you were looking at funding sources to the most of the projects that we have. Like again, there will be a few in the capital that either are fully grant funded or are going to not flow you through, need a particular reserve, or may, for example, it may be coming from, say, the recycling reserve, or there might be a smaller reserve that we're leaning on. And that's something too, when we come around next time, is I'm hoping that we can kind of show what we're seeing for our other reserves. These tend to be the ones that we lean on heavily to be able to do our capital projects. We've also, of course, in our water and sewer, water and wastewater conversations, and with hydro, we have those reserves that are set aside and by bylaw, and we can show you. I'm hoping next time that we meet that we're getting closer to sort of a year-end number, and hopefully we're able to kind of show what we think the actual reserve balances are. I mean, these will be pretty straightforward, but again, we do have a number of other reserves that we've got set aside that we can discuss to look at for, again, future funding of potential purchases of land or other things that council might want to do. So I'm going to leave that off. So we've talked about the capital, we've talked about the community works fund, and on all the other reserves, I should say, and how we're funding all of this capital. And again, too, we do dip, and you'll notice that across these reserves is that there'll be times when they grow and times when they dip, and that's something that we're cognizant of, and we're always working on trying to make sure that we're keeping that we're not getting into a place where we're in a negative balance. So to be able to fund the capital projects. I'm going to leave this. I don't know if Manager Sinstad has joined us, but I was going to share his graphs that he had on request from the previous meeting to discuss sort of where he's seeing with his buildings. And again, from him, it's not perfect because we haven't had the facility condition index team come in and do their work, and then we've got some budget to be able to have them come and do some of that work. And this is Peter's estimation on since he had the work done and where he's seeing things going. Manager Sinstad, are you there?
Excellent. Hi, Colin. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull up, share my screen here with your spreadsheet. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Just bear with me.
That's an interesting one. That'll throw everybody off.
Hey, Manager Sinstad. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I see we got the bubble graph up there. So this is a copy of the original one that was distributed after the 2017 assessment. So this is our official FCI values that were generated from those inspections. We discussed this this graph in a fair bit of detail a number of years ago. So I'll just go back to explain the facility condition index on your y-axis and your constructed on your x-axis. The facility condition index is a ratio of your deferred maintenance over replacement value. So 0 is a new building with $0 of deferred maintenance, where once you get up to 0.7, you see the red line there. That was the term we called dozer bait. And then anywhere between the orange and red line is a fair and kind of getting into that poor category between between 0.3 and 0.7, being where you really need to begin planning the building rehabilitation. So it'll be a little, I'm hoping that some of you might have printouts of this potentially in front of you, because we're going to be trying to gauge the change between the next two graphs. So Colin, if you're able to click over to the next graph there, we have 2022. So this is the current estimated FCI calculations that I've ran from based off of capital expenditures to date from since the original assessment. That is, as Colin McClure was saying, it is a very high level best guesstimate at this point, because our project dollar values that we see, if we spend $100,000 on a project, that doesn't mean that all of that $100,000 is going directly into contributing towards reduction of the FCI. When they do their assessment, it gets much more into the all the building subsystems. So you can understand, yeah, if your boiler system needs to be replaced, you can replace that with a $50,000 boiler or a $200,000 boiler and control systems, and that's still going to tick the same box. So I tried my best to give as accurate of calculations as I could here, but we can see from the current impact, some of our major projects being coke and gas works and touchstones, with minor improvements to various other facilities. So we're starting to centralize our portfolio in the lower half. And then, Colin, if you're able to switch to the next one. And then with the planned investments, with the current year to 2026 capital plan, that obviously has major funding allocated to the Civic Center, Fire Hall, and Government Place. So you can see further that our bubbles are dropping and staying centralized. And again, up at the top, we have our rental house and old museum. Those red ones have been removed. So our portfolio average that started at 0.31 will have moved down to 0.27 after our major improvements and removal of those two smaller items. Obviously, you can see at the top there, the Chamber of Mines and the Nelson Christian School. And then some of our smaller... sorry, Kevin, what was that?
I was wondering what I was just wondering what MCCS was, but no, it's the Christian School.
Yes.
Isn't that's slated for demolition though, isn't it?
Yes, we haven't officially planned a date for that, but we've been working with the tenant on solutions over the past number of years, and have basically informed that we are not investing further in that building.
Yeah, and I think council knows that we're doing through development services doing a planning exercise up on that campus to decide kind of what the needs of the college are and what the opportunities for the city are. The other one is the sewage treatment plant. That's just because we haven't got a concrete plan at this stage that it stays where it is.
Well, I was talking with Colin Ennis yesterday, I believe, about this, and he was estimating that likely in 2017 to 2018 would be the year that they'd be kicking off their major improvements.
2027 is what you're saying. That would be the starting year of the big upgrade.
Exactly. So the following graph, we should see that SDP bubble drop substantially.
Right. And I'm just
Colin, can you flip back to the original one, because it's I think seeing where these have dropped versus where we started.
Yeah, and one we can take a quick look at this, but there's another file as well that has a chart format that we can sort of see the change a little easier.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can find that one, Peter. So just talk amongst yourselves while I look for it.
Are there any questions immediately regarding the?
So, just a bit of
drafts here?
just to get us all sort of refreshed a little bit here. I noticed the Chamber of Mines building is on here, Peter.
Yes.
And I believe we own the land, but they own the building. Does that sound right, or am I mistaken?
I think we own the original building. They built the extension. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, maybe we should get a bit of clarity on that, because it may or may not need to be on our list.
My understanding, and I think my recollection of the lease agreement, it's been a number of years since I've looked at that, but we are responsible for envelope. So that would lead me to believe that we are the owner of the building.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that in writing somewhere. I've always been under the impression that the only thing we owned there was the land and they put the building on it. Okay, thank you. The other one.
Yeah, I will check with that.
Yeah, the other one
Sarah
was the Lakeside Car Barn. Where does that fit in our portfolio?
That's another similar one that likely should not be on here.
Right.
I would say.
That's what I thought, but you might want to check
Yeah.
on that too. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, because we did do the condition inspection, and through that process, I recall that we kind of uncovered some archaic paperwork and further conversations with the group there, and realized that we are not the owners of that. So that's that spat out from the report generation, but.
So on a little bit of a different tone, if you don't mind, the lakeside bathhouses, they're probably need a total renewal, I would suggest, but anyway. That's just what I'm thinking. They're quite outdated, and there's different use there now than what has been in the past. And the other one, Peter, I wanted to ask about was, you have two red one. Oh, you've got the rental house and the old museum up here. We know this situation there.
Yeah.
But was the gasworks building, like, is there a plan to actually liven that thing up with somebody actually using it or renting it or doing something?
Cornerstone General Contracting, the contractor that completed the restoration, have been utilizing the main floor of the building for I'd say since project completion, and then just recently they've sort of extended the scope of the lease to use as sort of their general office. It's a short-term non-committal lease, but it is seeing use and occupied. The second floor is still vacant. But we are still navigating our way through the Ministry of Environment and the subdivision potential issues.
Yeah. The reason I asked, Peter, is that we did in
I'd say until we have a greater understanding of that impact, finding a long-term tenant
the reason I asked was because if it was known that building was available, you might be surprised at, the kind of fit we would get for Gastown on the model that we're trying to look for down there. Now that it has been renovated and the envelope at least is up to code, and of course the rest of the building got extensive work to it. So the question I'd have then would be, would we look at putting it out on the market to see what was available, and secondly, we wouldn't have to divide it to do that, would we?
To rent or to sell?
To rent, yeah,
Rent, we wouldn't have to subdivide, right?
right. So
Yeah,
therefore, it could
It's
go out,
just-
it could go out at any
Yeah,
time
it's-
for,
yeah. The challenge has been it needs extensive leasehold improvements in the interior of the building. And, for someone to do that, they're looking for a longer term lease,
yeah,
probably 5+ years, which then it's a disposal. And anyway, there's some process. So you'd have to have a fair, a long-term lease on it to
yeah,
justify someone putting the amount of money that you're going to have to put in it to do those leaseholds. And, certainly we've talked to people in the past, and at least one person was, I'm not willing to do that unless I own the building. So, and, I guess, Colin, I think we can have leases that, as long as we advertise them as a disposal, over 5 years, and they're guaranteed. Most of our leases all have a clause that we can ask someone to leave with notice, but if council's open to not doing that with this building, then that might be an option.
yeah, okay. Okay, thanks, Kevin, that's good. Anyway, those were just a couple of things that were floating around on this page here. I just wanted to get a bit of clarity on. Thank you. Oh, Peter, one other question. It's not directly related to this, but somewhat. The lighting for the courthouse and touchstones, is that completed now?
We are, unfortunately for touchstones, for the lighting, all the wiring isn't just standard wiring, so we need exact dimensions for every single lighting fixture, and we have not had the resources to spend a day with a tape measure running through there. But we have a quote and all the lighting specs and count and everything nailed down. As soon as we can get these measurements, we should be able to get those ordered.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that it was still on the page before the door hits you on the back side going out, so.
Yeah, you betcha.
Manager Sinstad, do you, because the mayor spoke about, the component that we have control over with the touchstones and whatnot, but the courthouse, I know that they were interested, and I don't know if you've had any success with them, being able to discuss a plan that they had for lighting up theirs.
So, Colin, we have 2 hands up, just so everybody knows. We had Councillor Lochtenberg and Councillor Page in that order. So.
Oh, Colin, did you want to finish your question? Or?
I just was wondering if he had an update, because the mayor did talk about, because we are trying to, we've got the nice lighting down Vernon. We're hoping to get touchstones, also having a light on it and or lighting on it, and I know that the province was interested in lighting up their beautiful building at the courthouse, and I just didn't know if there had been any more movement on that.
Yeah, so preliminary discussions with them. They're certainly very, very interested. They wanted a low maintenance, very, very simple and non-intrusive solution, and I believe that's what we've developed for Touchstone. So once we have all that final project spec package tidied up, I'll be distributing that to the province to hopefully get their buy-in as well. But I'm waiting so that we have all the information and hopefully a final rendering so that we can pass on something a little more than a spec sheet for a lighting fixture, I guess.
Thank you.
Colin, this is a question probably for you. Can you remind me what our policy is on charging rent and do those rents really cover contribution to the capital upgrades or maintenance of the buildings? I'm thinking particularly, like, if you just go down the list, everything from the soccer arena, the theater, the civic center in general. Like, are we charging appropriate rents? Because for example, I think the arena in the civic, we were not charging rent to the RDCK to Rec 5 really much at all, or certainly not proportional to what it would cost to contribute to the capital of that building.
Yeah, and I guess the lead on that for me, what I would say is that no, we are basically in a mode of covering some O&M, which we kind of go out there, and that's about all that we get for some buildings. And again, that's where, there's no we do talk about that, but Touchstone's capital, we don't charge them.
Yeah, let's go down that. Call money or Peter, go down the list and yeah, it'd be good to let council know what we receive.
Yeah.
The Capitol Theater, no rent. The mausoleum is always a mystery to me. I think we charge a rent, but that one should be reviewed. Where are we with that, Colin? Because it was some deal made way back in the day, and it's leased to a third party, and I don't know what we get there.
Yeah, Kevin, that was part of the crematorium.
Yeah,
and the mausoleum are all part of that agreement. I have no idea what it looked like, but probably is something you should dig out. Or, whoops, no pun intended. You should dig up.
Yeah, Chamber of Mines, no rent.
No, Chamber of Mines, they pay rent.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Civic Center curling rink, they do contribute, right?
Kevin, sorry, Kevin, if you don't mind, before you jump past the Chamber of Mines, can we make a note to figure out, what we're charging and how it is
our building. It's my understanding is the original building was the city's, and they added on. They got grants to add on, which in most cases we end up not. We allow that to happen, but we don't say you have ownership in this property now. So I think Peter would be right on that one. And that, I guess, is why we're charging them rent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll leave it to Colin. You know these better than me.
Sure. So the curling rink, of course, one of the situations where the curling club built the building, we own the land. So again, we're always in partnership with these. But yes, we have some envelope pieces, but they pay not a big rent, but they're responsible for water, sewer, etc. Civic Center, soccer arena, yes, they are paying it, and they just wanted to go the policy. So our policy on city-owned properties lease fees, last effective date was December 1st of 2000, and the lease and rental fees of city-owned property by an individual for commercial purposes shall be at a minimum of 8% of the assessed value or market value, whichever is greater. For nonprofit organizations, the rate shall be 5% of the assessed value of the lands and improvements, or a minimum of $250 per month, whichever is greater. This policy may be varied on special application to council. So just get, when you ask that question, that's sort of where, as Councillor Page asked earlier, that's where we get that rental. So inside the Civic Center, you've got a few different entities that we do charge rent that would be based on this particular policy. So again, in particular, the one that I'm thinking about is your gymnastics, and would apply to the Civic Theater, although they took on some very significant leaseholds, improvements to the HVAC system and other work that was then traded to kind of have them not paying rent for a certain number of years. And as the years go by, it'll still be a while till we get to the end of that. But they took on a cost that the city would have had to have borne as the owner, and so that's how we've kind of got to a relationship with the with that particular entity. And there's probably someone else renting their manager since that, but it's out of my mind right now. Those are the two that I'm thinking about.
Dance umbrella.
Dance Umbrella, yeah. I'm not sure. I don't actually know on Dance Umbrella we do that. I think we just have found a rate because there's always been looking at doing improvements in that space.
And that's it? Is that's the last one?
No, that's kind of, I think, in the civic center. I mean, of course, we've been working on an agreement with the rink side of it, and so to have that being operated through, or again, they kind of take on the cost, but then they also collect the rent for the ice rental, and that's the Rec 5 NDCC.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fire hall, obviously no rent there. Yes, government place, we've got rent, and it's with the relationship, as we spoke earlier, with the province that has the leases that have been long standing. Gyro Park Pool House, don't have any rent there. Same with the pump house. The Lakeside Park Bathhouse, we sort of, as part of Rec 5, I think, did some sharing, so we no longer pay for the lifeguards, and they don't rent out the space that they're in for doing their boat rentals. So we've done some work together there to try to cost more on paperwork back and forth rather than working with each other on our projects. Lakeside Park Car Barn. No rent there, but it sounds like, again, from Peter's side, that it may not be a building that we own anyway. The Lakeside Park concession, yes, we do get a rent, and we do go out for, I think it's every 5 years to see who wants to operate that at the location. So we do get rent for that. Lakeside Park lunchroom, that's for public works staff to use when they're there. Let me just get to here. So Lakeside Park, Taylor Lake Fieldhouse, obviously it's got some washrooms. There is some question that we were working with the Nelson Soccer Association because they built, I think, a chunk of that building, and so there's been sort of I think a relationship there, but that's come due in the recent while. The Lakeside Park Warehouse building, I know that CEO Cormac was saying, can we please finish siding that? And so that's something that we need to I think, look at. But it's not something that we rent out. Municipal Airport, yes, we've got a number of rentals from the hangar component that we have there. And because of the terminal side, that's where we've made this relationship with NADAS, who's gets funds from us, but then does like line painting, and they do maintenance around the fencing and other portions. And this was a place as well that saw a significant increase to the rental rates to the hangars, based on the fact that they're on land, and that assessed value of land has obviously increased. And so that's been a good thing. And for there, we cover our costs and then have money going into the reserve. Plus, we have a significant admin fee that we charge them as part of that work to whether it's the paperwork and accounting that goes on for the fuel components, because we buy the fuel for the fuel pumps and have to account for that, and other small things like where we need to go and use our own forces at times. So we've got budget in there for that. But there's a rental there. Yes, I think that the Nelson Christian Community School chapel does pay us a rent. That's again, the chapel and the school are kind of combined there. The old museum has not been used, and hopefully, we'll figure we got a future on trying to figure that out. No rental there at the police library or public works storage or public works. Well, I should say in public works, we do find a way to sort of have BC Transit help self-fund that. So we allocate a portion of our cost of that goes to our AOA, or our agreement with the BC and Transit, and they help fund a portion of that. The rental house, again, was a place where we did get a minimal amount of rent. Senior Center, this is always a bit of an anomaly for me, but this time there is no rent that comes in for that. SDP, no rent. Touchstones, no rent. Youth Center, no rent.
And just
Okay, if I may,
Public Works.
supplemental.
Sorry, just on Public Works. So Nelson Hydro does pay for their
Right.
portion of that building, and that's part of rates. And I guess, Colin, do we charge that to the other utilities, water and sewer?
There isn't, yes, there would be for storage, I think, on the warehouse. We charge out for the warehouse usage.
Okay.
Okay, then just a quick supplemental, and Councillor Page, maybe you're gonna build on this. I'm not sure, but I'll be quick. Which is, clearly we've got a patchwork of application of this policy around 8% for private, 5% for nonprofit, and I understand why. Some of that makes sense. These are historical agreements we've made to bridge through something. Ideally, it would seem to me that we sort of refresh or review all of those agreements and bring everybody up to that 8%, and then it could come before council if those respective entities want a grant to or some sort of new relationship. Then that would come as a part of and a separate process, and we would. Especially what we're going to move to there in terms of our contributions to these various entities, we would include all of those other entities as well, which seem to be they're getting sort of the benefit, but there's no acknowledgement necessarily of that benefit that everyone from the soccer associations to others that are getting, and we're just sort of not acknowledging that. So I would recommend we as a council have staff review those relationships with the goal towards bringing everybody up to that 5% of assessment level. And then for those that have sort of extenuating circumstances, we then sort of have them come before council as a part of all of the other organizations that are coming before council to make requests for financial support, because it seems like these guys, it's a little bit unfair. They're getting a pass, and the city is not being properly acknowledged for these contributions that we're making.
Yes, I guess I would want to. One of the first things that manager Sinstad did was start to look through all of our leases, and we have been slowly getting so that they are all sort of in compliance with what the policy says, because there certainly had been historical things, and as they've come up, that's what we've been doing. Now, if you're speaking about, for example, a Touchstones or a Capital, where again, if we charge them, I can, in fact, maybe it's a time, I don't know how many other questions are on this particular sheet, but that might be, it could be a time soon to move on to my other sheet on the major grant recipients, just because there's some numbers there. But if you were to charge, for example, just quickly here, at the 5% rate, the new Touchstones just got assessed this year, a significant increase. Their rent would be $125,000 at the non-for-profit rate, if there was someone wanting to rent that space based on our policy. So to go from, you need to pay us $125,000, and we're giving you $225,000 in rent. That, again, I'm hearing you. I'm not disputing. I'm just saying to you, but that's one of those components, and that. Is possible, yeah. But I know that they're kind of that curator of our history, so I think that there's been that acknowledgement that
and I just call it not just to be clear, just to be clear on that, I'm not saying that we somehow reduce the amount of contribution we're making to Touchstone. What I would rather see is that it is paid and our contribution is shown as the 340,000, and I think that creates sort of transparency and sort of sets a standard across which all of our respective priorities and nonprofits that are using our facilities kind of are all on the same level, so we can see them more clearly that way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not at all.
Yeah. So I think that's what I was going to say. Just clarify. So you would show here's the rent and here's rent relief of 125 plus an operating grant of 260 or whatever.
A flow-through grant.
Yeah, interesting. Because it was not totally surprising, because I know that we did a big upgrade on it, but Touchstones went from 1.9 to 2.5 in assessed value for 2021 over 2022. And yet it's quite interesting because the Capitol Theatre has not changed from its 859 assessed value since 2012. Oh, sorry, 2013. So again, when, as CAO Cormac noted, if you're not paying taxes on it, then I think that it doesn't necessarily get caught in the, in that sort of, hey, we should make sure that this is this. Now, I will admit that in 2022, it did go from 859 to 959. So, those are things. I mean, it's a way of seeing it as, I think, sometimes even showing what we talk about on, it's a good line that I can add here, sort of, rent relief based on our policy. I mean, it's an important thing, I think, Councillor Lautenberg, to note. And again, with them not swinging that often, you kind of see that almost when we look at their property taxes, where the property taxes have actually been dropping because assessed value has stayed the same for 10 or 12 years. Yet we know that assessed values for other commercial buildings have gone up, probably 100%. And so you kind of see this place where their value has not changed. And so as the assessed value has gone up, and as we at the city under council's guidance has said, let's make sure the multiplier is not harming, a residential paying more as it goes up, and then, oh, hey, now commercial, we try to keep it even. But the fact that there's been no increase to their assessed value, some of those things don't necessarily speak to what's actually happening in the market per se, if this was a market kind of situation. So I don't know if that answers that question, but certainly that's something I can add to the line. I think that it's a good idea. Yep.
And Councillor Lautenberg, would you want to see that on, playing fields?
Sorry, I missed that.
On, for example, playing fields. Playing fields are, that land's worth.
There might be.
The airport is worth, millions. The lakeside playing fields are worth millions in land value.
I think that might be a discussion for council. There might be some sort of exceptions in which it just like fields are maybe an exception. I don't know, but I would prefer. Like my instinct is to say it should be applied universally, as opposed to what feels a bit patchworky. Again, makes sense that it's patchworky because of history, but
we can certainly start with buildings. Things like the Civic would be. I guess we can show what the gross rent of the building would be, and the various tenants and what they pay, I guess, towards it. Some are in specific spaces, but like the recreation side of it is, there's hockey and figure skating and etc. in some of those. So some of the civic buildings are in buildings, and you have one tenant. Like the NDCC. What would be the value of that, and what are the rents that are being collected? Maybe that's something the Rec Commission wants to look at, and in terms of that, look at it.
My turn.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Page.
Okay, I got a few things in the waiting room. So I'll start with an affirmation that I agree. It was on my list of comments that when we do get these balance sheets from these organizations asking for grants, it would be great if there is a financial mechanism that shows up on their balance sheets as a rent relief when we're not charging them rent. I think that was flagged as confusion at the Civic, understanding the operating agreement, understanding how we flow a benefit through to that building, but it doesn't get captured on anyone's balance sheets because it's just built into an assumption through these historic agreements. So I think obviously there's a lot to chew on there. From what I've heard around the table already, you guys will think about that some more and bring us back something that we can look to normalize that across the space, and buildings is a good place to start. The Civic, though, with S226, I do want to, just for council's refreshment and anyone else, there is no buy-in from the service to take care of the Civic or that second arena. And so we have an operating agreement in place with the NDCC to do the bookings so that the service presented to the recreational user groups is seamless and being held in one place and we're not duplicating effort. But the point is well taken that the rent we are charging out to that operating agreement should be a discussion that we can raise at S226 so that fees that are set for those rentals can accommodate the kinds of renewals that need to happen inside of that space. But when it comes to subsidization, until there is a successful conversation, if there ever will be, about the service taking on that facility as one of value to the district, we always just need to be reminded and be careful that at this point, this district has not agreed as a whole to subsidize that location. And so all we have in place now is an operating agreement so that the city is not duplicating a bunch of effort the NDCC is naturally capable of doing, but the city is kind of underneath subsidizing the existence of that building and taking care of any of the capital considerations that need to come up over time. So certainly something to see about how we might charge out rent so that the fees set for that building can be better reflective of its cost, and then come back with a grant relief or rent relief of some sort if we're thinking about those terms to be like, and here's our subsidy and this is how we're knocking that back down, because it's happening.
Councillor Page, on that one, has there been, as Colin identified in our capital plan, we're contributing funding towards the NDCC in addition to the taxation. Our residents are paying towards that, paying all the operating maintenance capital expenses. Has there been a discussion about the NDCC?
Are you talking about the hydro?
No.
Oh, I think just some of the community works fund that we spent on helping them with lights and other projects. It's not huge, but it is an acknowledgement that we want to work with our partners. And
and just wondering if that discussion have been had around the Civic and them contributing similar towards the capital upgrades of the Civic, as not only is the city contributing in taxation to the capital upgrades of the NDCC, they're also using community works funds on certain projects. So maybe that's a small place to start, is to at least have them consider the capital upgrades that are happening at the Civic for those same recreation users and contributing some community works funds or that type of funding. They have significant grants and lieux. I know those community work funds are going out to rural directors that don't even have any regional facilities in their area, and maybe that can be better directed to these facilities that actually are public buildings.
Okay, the point is taken. It might be operationally efficient to identify projects in that building that would qualify for that to get specific. I also might urge a little bit of focus towards the curling question that is developing around the ice capacity and making sure. So we had a letter from Nelson Curling. They are willing to commit funds to explore expanding the capacity of the ice plant when it's renewed in 2024. Rec Commission has at least referred the discussion to the capital budgets on the 14th to consider doing the exploration of expanding the plant to accommodate the ice plant. And I think we need to be, and I think we need to talk about this Tuesday, and I can send the letter around. I sent it to you, Colin, but I think the city should approve that we would also come in with the curling rink to pay for that exploration. And I think we should have that discussion about only that piece right now, so it doesn't get derailed with another discussion, because the rural directors are certainly going to be super sensitive to anything that looks like scope creep. And if we haven't even gotten to a place where we can have a real discussion about whether or not we can deduplicate the ice plants in that area, to the benefit of all for lower operating costs, and then we start to bring something else on top of it, I think that would be a place where we would fail on both. So, but long term, if we can get that squared away and everyone feels fair and there's trust is flowing around the room, and that we're not trying to bring curling into the service, but rather trying to provide a service we can charge out to curling, and they can take a huge cost off of their books over the next 10 years.
So,
and we can identify.
Councillor Page, I just want to, I know what you're talking about is definitely touching on the topic at hand, but there's a bigger conversation around that partnership as well. So if you could sort of stay clear of that.
I'm landing the plane.
Yeah, so try and blend as
so-
quickly as you can, because lunch is coming here in a few minutes.
Landon. Yeah, I get it.
Thank
you know,
you.
we don't want our lasagnas getting cold while the rest of us eat out of a bag lunch. So in the sense of that, I think as long as we can identify a specific project that qualifies for community works on the civic side, come later in the year in April or May, let's start having those discussions and see if there's a place to collaborate. And the last thing I had, so I think unless there's any other comments on that, that's just work we're doing. Kevin, you talked about the Coke Works lease needing to have a disposition, and I didn't understand what you meant by that, so I wanted clarity.
Yeah,
We had a long time.
yeah, that's it's just a process in the community charter. If we lease anything beyond 5 years, it's considered a disposition. It's not that you're actually disposing of it. It's just that you're tying it up for a longer period of time, and then there's process to that. So we need to advertise it, let the community comment on it, and so it's a process thing.
Thanks. I'm in support of going down that route.
It's kind of twofold, because you could have a proponent that you would like, and that's the case. That's where we sometimes before said, well, do we put it out to who wants to rent the space? Understanding it's got leaseholds, but you could find one person that's interested and comes to you. But then as long as you communicate it out saying the city is going to lease out for X amount of years to this individual, when you communicate it, that's where your comfort level is. It just, again, can't be sort of just done without it kind of having that public communication. Yep.
Okay.
And just one thing is, I don't want to belabor this, but Councillor Page, just to, I think that and I know that you get it, but just as a reminder, I just get a little bit concerned. This is a two-part answer for you, but when we talk about charging kind of rents for ice and that sort of stuff, now the Civic being, one ice plant, that if we're not subsidizing it, right, and then you can go and rent at the newer NDCC, which is hugely subsidized, right, you can see where all of a sudden now it's like, well, why would I pay extra to be in this rink when I can be in this rink? So that's one concern that I would have. And one of the other things that we have approached and we have talked about with the individuals that rent our facilities, and I know that this sometimes can seem unfair, and it's been some tough conversations with some of these groups, but in the past, previous councils have said, because there is no funding that comes from the regional district to, say, our soccer fields at the time, then therefore there is a fee for a Nelson resident, and then there is either a tax or a higher fee that needs to be paid for because you're a non-resident. And certainly certain groups that are in some of our buildings are saying, well, that's the city's responsibility to go and ask the regional district for more money because 50% of my participants are from the regional district. And we say, well, we ask ad nauseum for support, and that's not something that kind of usually happens. And I get that. It's creep and all the different reasons why. Yep.
Just before we go there, because I think we always get into this trap of calling it the regional district. We're talking about rural residents, because we are part of the regional district. Municipalities are just as much part of the regional district as our rural residents. So I think we just need to be clear that it's the the rural residents that we're talking about here that aren't paying taxes towards these facilities that they use on the same basis as city residents.
Right, and businesses who are paying the taxes. So we have noted that in the past, we can have a bylaw where there's sort of a fee that we actually can impart on someone that is renting our facility, that if you have a user that is not from a Nelson taxpayer, but as a rural taxpayer who is not funding, for example, something in the civic, that then there is a recognition that they are helping to assist the cost, and therefore there can be a higher fee, which then helps out for the concerns that they have about rent and an O&M at a city-owned building, which is actually very subsidized in itself. So it becomes a bit of a round circle. They don't want to do that. They don't want to be a person, to have to collect that or charge that. So it becomes, again, a very difficult process.
So, if I may, Mayor, I know you guys probably got your food there. I think there's benefit. That I agree with you, Colin. And those are, obviously you can appreciate you have these discussions when you can have these discussions when it's around fees and charges as these questions of fairness come up. Obviously, the library charges different rates based on your zip code and where you're coming from to do exactly that. But I think there's benefit to saying this is the cost and this is what we would charge rent for so that we can take care of the building, and then providing that grant relief, that rent relief as a grant component each year so that that money is shown to flow both in and out, even if it's just a one-to-one, just so that when we're setting those fees and talking about those subsidizations, we can see how Nelson is contributing to keep those subsidized and lower. Because I think it just from the accounting perspective, as it passes back and forth, creates transparency, as Councillor Lautenberg was talking about, between the different tables as to where the subsidizations are happening, because they are already. I think you end up in the same place where you're still supporting those groups in the same way, and you're not spiking their rent on them. I don't want anyone to think that's certainly not the goal, but you are providing the opportunity in those financial statements to give that clarity that there's a benefit flowing here. It's just putting it on paper in my mind, which then allows you, I think, to have some of those other conversations down the road, but create some clarity. But yes, I agree with everything about people contributing into these services.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, I don't know if is there more hands up?
I see another hand up there. I'm not sure whose it is. Okay. Oh, it's gone now. So, Colin, before we head for lunch here, I just made a couple of notes on that sheet. As an example, the rowing club building, not sure the status on that. Rosemont Park, there's a washroom facility up there now by the skate park. And then, of course, you have some facilities at Lions Park. And then we have Queenie Park that's just been had a major overhaul.
Yes, fair question. I'm not sure if Manager Sinstad, whether or not, that maybe it was too small of an item to even put in here. I don't know. Again, Queenie, we don't really have buildings per se other than maybe the washrooms, but this isn't fully exhaustive, but there's I don't know if Manager Sinstad is still with us, and whether or not maybe they didn't get part of that original facility condition index.
On our last budget meeting, though, Colin, we did have a number there thrown at us for a washroom at Cottonwood Park. There was, what was it, $500,000 or $300,000. So small as they are, there's some value to them, and clearly some upkeep and maintenance.
Agreed. But sorry, Manager, since that, did you say that we maybe didn't do them as a facility condition index, or just, again, you only have so many lines sometimes, I think, maybe on your graphs?
Yes, Colin, that is correct. Some of those smaller just parks or washrooms building, we did not include in the original assessment.
Okay. So, okay.
Yeah. So I think what I'm saying, Colin, is maybe we should, because, if the numbers we're hearing around delivering washrooms are right, going forward, should any of those need to be replaced, clearly that's
Well, and then there's a whole number, none of the utility facilities are on here.
Yeah.
So those are in their own places. So we have significantly more facilities and assets than is shown on here.
Okay.
This is the ones that are outside, those core services.
Yeah, okay. And then the rowing club, Peter, what's the status there? We just own the land, they own the building situation, or?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. So a few of those things we talked about, like the Chamber of Mines, say the rowing club as an example, it'd be good to find out just when people have a chance to look at those agreements and see who owns what and who's responsible for what going forward. So.
Yeah, it's a long history. The Rod and Gun Club's not on here either.
Right, exactly, yeah. Rod and Gun Club.
Technically, we own that building as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I don't want to chop us off here, but it is around lunchtime. Colin, how much more time will you need when we come back, so then I can decide what we can decide just how long we should take?
Yeah, I was thinking it might be half an hour, 45 minutes, and it was just to go over the major grant city recipients. And again, I appreciate Councillor Lautenberg and Councillor Page kind of thinking about a recognition, because one of the things that we try to do in this spreadsheet, and I don't think it's to try to defend ourselves, but it is trying to acknowledge that we support in many different ways on other than the grant that we get for the organization. And so that for me is the conversation, and it's more educational than anything. And I appreciate some of the councillors have thought, I think, what I'm hearing is that actually we should have sort of a kind of an in and an out almost of on some of them that do have are inside our buildings.
So how about 12:35? We'll go back then.
I think that's fine for me. Yeah.
Is that okay with everybody? Sure. Okay, so a motion to
I
recess.
have a big bag lunch.
Yeah. Motion to recess by Councillor Charlwood, second by Councillor Renwick. All in favor? Thank you.
How are we applying sort of our policy on things? And some of those, like you said, are historical documents and that arrangements were made. But I always think it's important because we always want to recognize the great work that they do in our community. That is an absolute, and I know that goes for all council, staff, residents, and businesses. But I also want to kind of, I guess, recognize or educate not only council, but those in our community that would say, hey, what are you doing to assist with these locations? And yes, we do provide them a grant for running the building, but you can see that we also tend to pick up another, landlord type expenses that would be kind of, repairs and maintenance that we want to help out with, and also there's usually some big capital funding. But some of the things that aren't talked about as well is as one noted, if the lease is for $1, so you get a building, we help out with some operating expenses. We provide you with a grant, and then the hope is that you're in a position, and again, I know that COVID has made things extremely difficult for arts group and other groups, but if we're doing that, and I think that the number for Touchstones itself was that they basically cover all of the expenses, building expenses, I guess I would say heat, electricity, utilities, and 26% of the wages that are part of their operations. And so it's a significant grant that's coming. But we also in 2021, did a repointing of that building and at a cost of $701,000. Now, again, need to also note that we did get a grant of $200,000 from CBT, which is always fantastic. So, but there's $500,000 that would have come from, the different reserve fundings that we have, taxation in some aspects, or if you didn't own that building, or if we didn't, we want to keep that building up and going, and it's probably something that doesn't have to be done for a long time. But I think it's just important that council is aware that we do ongoing capital. We've got some other work that we're planning on doing, both the lighting project and some interior work that we're hoping to do in the Touchstones for 2022. And again, the other numbers that I think are important are the progressive tax exemption that we provide, and you can actually see from 2012 that it was higher then than it even is now, which I found quite fascinating. And then so I was spending some time digging through the numbers, and and I know that BC Assessment has their hands full, but in 2012, the building was assessed at $1.9 million. In 2013, it was at $2,005,000. Then in 2014, dropped to 1.75 million, and then in 2015, 1.5 million, and basically stayed there for a while, and then started to climb again into that 1.7, 1.8 in 2019, 1.9 in 2020, and then likely in a reflection of the building permit we would have taken out to do the work at Touchstones. It has been appraised in 2021 at $2.521 million. So again, a couple of things where its value is from 2012 and 13 was, at that around $2 million, and then it sort of went down and then back up. And so you kind of see that as a reflection of the taxes that, weren't required because the city had always had them as a permissive tax exemption. And again, understanding that it's been a tough time for all of these groups, but also just wanting to see the request and kind of where that sits as a dollar amount and a percentage ask, and wanting, again, I don't know if anybody has any questions on this, but I'm just going to move down. And some may say, well, why do you have such a breakdown on these ones? Well, most of the other locations, they're responsible for their utilities, taxes, etc. So, for example, like the visitor center, we gave them a bit of a lift there in 2018, 2019, and inflationary kind of lift, and they are a group that has found grants. We've helped out them with grants, provided CIP councils that they did to help the restoration. They were able to get grants from the province and chipped away, and been able to take what was an eyesore and to make it into a beautifully refurbished building. But comes with that is that they pay property taxes, and their assessed value has increased as they've gone through this renovation work. So there's money that comes back to the city through the fact that they are paying property taxes. Some of the other ones here are not necessarily like the CDC or some of these other ones that we provide funding to, NDAC, for example, pretty minor, and then they tend to take that money and leverage it with us. And but in the same boat, the two that maybe are more of a centerpiece are the Touchstones and the Capital, in that they get their building is basically given to them, and then out of that they are to do their operations. And so again, also do not, especially when we look at the Capital, it would be an oversight for council, because the other side of what we're not seeing on some of these is that when we've done some capital funding, or when the city has come to the table with capital funding, certainly the executive director there, Stephanie Fisher, has just done a fantastic job. If you've been attending that location for a long period of time, the upgrades, whether or not it's the chairs or the HVAC system or interior work that has gone on there, has been significant, and she has just been a star on garnering what funds that we may have with her own operating funds to get grant money to be successful in upgrading that building. So it's not lost on us, but again, also just wanting to point out on our side how there's more than meets the eye than just, hey, we give you, what grant did we provide you, and is that enough? So just kind of giving a full picture of the associated support that council provides in different ways that are not as visible as a payment coming through in their bank account. And as we discussed earlier today, and again, quite fascinating to me, that for basically from 2012 to 2020, so that's a good 8 years, it's been around 859,000 has been the assessed value. And again, as we talked earlier about Touchstones, at 859 at our policy for rent that we do if someone else is a not-for-profit renting our building at 5%, which is the break. They're in that $43,000 would be the expected rent amount that you would get based on our assessed value. And now it has jumped to the assessed value jumped in 2021. No surprise there, but that increase itself kind of moves that the rent would be around $48,000. So again, from 43 to 48, just on that sort of 1 year change in assessed value. So again, I don't know if there's any questions. I know that you can't see the whole screen, and I can scroll down.
Yes, we have Councillor Lochtenberg's got his hand
Okay.
up. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. On touchstones, and this will apply to the capital and others too, based on that assessed value at 5%, if that was our policy so that we're comparing apples to apples globally, it looks to me like that our contribution to touchstones, for example, would be more like 125,000 versus that municipal tax exemption of 16 or combined up to 30. So just to kind of get, again, not in any way talking about reducing our contribution to touchstones or the capital or otherwise, but just to get us onto an apples to apples comparison, it would be good if we can get this in terms of that 5% assessed, 5% on assessed value.
Yep. No, I like I said, I could certainly do that, and you've talked earlier. We've got some work to do, and but for me, if I'm looking through, we because these ones get a major city grants is sort of why we created this document to kind of show the support that we provide. When you have someone that is paying that 5%, whether or not that's the Nelson Soccer Association or, say, for example, the gymnastics, they have also come forward and council has granted them a permissive tax exemption. So that is, again, one thing too that to keep in mind that what's not happening here, like you said, would be sort of that what a rent on policy sort of
Hand up now.
revenue generator that would be for the city, and whether or not that flowed back to them and then they pay rent. I mean, I understand it, but I also don't want to create accounting steps that cost us money for just the sake of showing it, or rather just being able to compare what's happening with all of our buildings that we're renting out. I mean, I see that as maybe what I'm hearing is maybe a larger document in the future is saying, okay, we need to account for this, and in the same way. So if I'm going to compare what's happening with some of our other renters in our buildings, that I'm now getting a fair understanding of what's being supplied or supported, or how we're supporting.
Yeah, and I think just as a supplemental there, yes, that's what we're trying to do. I'm not talking about a change in the accounting in any way, but for us as council, like when we look at a document like this, we're essentially weighing priorities. Like, do we invest more here versus there? We don't at this point have a accurate comparison between all of our major grant recipients. So it would be great to sort of just, even in this document, you can even add just a separate line if that helps, to say, if we were to compare them, if we were to assess them all the same, this is what that amount would be. So in the case of touchstones, 125,000 is more accurate than 31 or 32 that we've got here.
Well, and again, just to be clear, even if you're paying rent, say this was, that there's others, for example, the chamber would be a non-for-profit, right? So you're giving them a grant. I don't kind of show, hey, by the way, we're also receiving taxation from them. And if it was our building, they would also be paying us rent as well. I mean, they may come and say, hey, can you provide a progressive tax exemption if they were in our building? I mean, which would be possible. But again, like I said, it's a key component for council and the public to be aware that they are getting a taxation break, but the taxation break doesn't necessarily have there's no reflection, I guess, of what actual rent would be. Because if you were in another building, say you couldn't get here, but you had to rent from someone else, which they do, and it's like, you're now responsible for rent. Here's my rent fee, plus now you got your O&M, which is your property taxes and insurance, etc., like that. So, yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Page.
question, and maybe Colin, you know the answer. Does the destination marketing contribute into the visitor center for its
No, they don't.
core funding?
I do not know that. I know that they work in
I
tandem.
can,
Oh,
it doesn't.
no, okay.
It doesn't from the Visitor Information Center.
It's not a conversation, I guess, for here or now, but does that need to bring some alignment together? Because it seems, given the mandate of destination marketing and the ability to leverage taxation on the accommodators that are out hosting those visitors, seems like a place where there should be some shared responsibility around the visitor center. Obviously, there's a value, great value to the city to have such a facility in our location and have those services provided, but there is also this entire bucket over in destination marketing around with both the ability to do taxation and they're inviting the guests in the first place. So I wonder if we should start having some of those conversations to see how we can share the load a little bit there.
He's right.
I can reach out to Tom. I'm not sure if that was not allowed as something they could fund, but I'll find that out.
And I think that there is always conversations on how do we do things together, right? I mean, I know there's may not be a financial contribution, but I think that there's definitely...
They definitely sit on their board.
So Kevin, or Councillor Page, that has been talked about. In fact, I think the Chamber has a member on the Destination Marketing Board.
Yeah.
So that conversation has been had in the past. I'm not sure where it went, but it's maybe something worth revisiting.
If I can jump in for what I know, the Kootenay Lake Tourism and the funds that they get through taxation are to be used to promote the area, period, for promotional purposes. So I know there's been all sorts of things bandied around about, could we do this? Could we do that? They're very strict. So, it never hurts to ask the question, but at the end of the day, that's what it's for. It's for promotion. It's to get people here, period. Not once they get here, let's do this with them. It's just to get people to the Kootenay Lake area. Yeah.
Those parameters have changed in recent years. Like they can, for instance, invest in housing for workforces to support tourism businesses is one of the newer things they're allowed to put money into. So, and I think
reached out to Tom.
Visitor services is one of them. So I'm fine with just leaving it there as a point of curiosity and somewhere to follow up with, but we'll take in points across the table.
Yeah. One thing too, I didn't know exactly how to reflect it, but I'll maybe comment on it. So you'll notice the Innovation Center had a $40,000 ask in 2021, as was noted at the meeting. We, because of the changes that they had gone through, there was an unsurety and there was a position vacant for a while, that we did not release those funds. And so not trying to create controversy, but on the ask for the 60, I just want to caveat that was the fact that we did not pay the 40. So the 60 is maybe, I'm trying to be misleading, but it's like their ask is actually for 40 for the current year, and then just for the fact that they did do some work in 2021, that they were hoping to get that additional 20. So that may come across not as I'm not in a
was
way
the
that
ask
they're
was
asking
the
on
ask
top
not,
of it. So.
the ask was for 20, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Well,
there was
it's
40's already been approved in
Yeah.
the 2021 budget,
Yeah.
so they need another 20
Right.
as new funding.
Yeah. So I
That's
can
how I
just
characterize it.
Yeah, exactly. So just trying to note that their ask was, and what was approved in 2021 was 40. We didn't pay it. And so when I plunked it in here at 60, it was just trying to recognize, to discuss here that that's, 20 from last year and hoping for a 40 this year, recognizing that although approved for 40, they didn't really deliver as much as they had hoped, do some transitions. And so they were hoping to get 20 to cover the costs that they did incur in 2021 and bring that into 2022. On top of the ask for 2022. So hopefully that creates some clarity rather than they're just, growing this ongoing.
Yeah, yeah, they're not asking for 60. Just to be clear, that's ongoing.
Yes.
They asked for 40 for 2022, but we have 20 carryover from
Yes.
2021. So the new ask is, or the impact on the city is another 20. I think it's the way to understand that.
John, if I may really for a second, coming back to, and this connects to the Innovation Center as well, but coming back to getting us onto par in terms of that 5% of the assessment as kind of the amount that we're showing we're contributing. I think in general, a lot of these asks are really leverage points to get grant funding or significant grant funding, and showing the city's contribution as like a greater contribution from the city in the case of, say, touchstones or the capital, it should be, from my understanding, should be a benefit to them to leverage that up. So and I say that now because in the case of the Innovation Center, that's a good example, like a showing the 60, even though it's only a 40 contribution, 20 from before. That's good. You'll be able to sort of multiply that up with grant funding. And so in general, whatever we can do to pad the number, we should do that.
Because we do that with library, and they do use that as city contribution when they apply for grants and stuff.
Yeah. So again, I know I don't see any hands, but Councillor Charlwood, I don't know if Councillor Woodward has been with us. He's been pretty quiet today.
Yeah.
But
Councillor Woodward is gone.
No, I'm here.
Oh, he's
I'm
here.
here.
Oh, sorry, I
I've been
beg
here
your pardon. I thought you were leaving.
I've been here the whole time.
Oh,
I've been here the whole time.
because your email said you were leaving at 12. So.
No, that's from the last meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right.
So
Okay.
Councillor Woodward, you've been pretty quiet today overall, and I just didn't know if I'd hate to think that you would miss out on an opportunity to ask any questions about today or what you've heard today or otherwise.
No, I'm good, Colin. I'm just taking in the information.
Yeah. Okay. And that obviously goes out to Councillor Charlwood as well. She's been relatively quiet as well.
So, Colin, I hope. So, Colin, you're keeping track. You're keeping track of some of the. There's some good suggestions here today. You have addressed one of them with this sheet of paper here. So hopefully you're keeping track of some of the other ideas that were put out there to hopefully gain a better understanding for everybody on our not only the budget process but the allocation and how we arrive at it, etc. So.
Yeah, and again, even earlier, as we talked about with buildings and whatnot, that some of them that we didn't have a facility condition index assessment done on them, but we do have money in the budget this year to do an update on ours. So whether or not that's something that we can get them to look at a few of these other ones that we're missing. So again, yes, definitely, I take notes and try to best as I can, get solutions or get answers for you.
Yeah,
and it's recorded.
Councillor
it's recorded.
Councillor
Yeah, now it's recorded.
Councillor Lochtenberg has another question.
Yeah, just a quick one, clarification. So, Colin, these numbers here. It looks like you just dropped in the full ask. Are we supposed to discuss how much we want to contribute over and above what we've done historically?
Yeah. And I don't think today. And again, I apologize that we're not at that stage. I think what because these funds. Not all, like some tend to be as an example, it was out of surplus that we were going to provide the money to this, for example, to the Innovation Center. So, you were already drawing on that. It didn't get spent. So obviously it just stays where it is. So if you're going, again, that's a place where you're like, okay, this is kind of those one-time funding components. There's a little bit of both here. Some of them tend to be like the NIC, where we're trying to get them off the help them out, get them sorted, hopefully get them seed money to get grants and get going. And there's been a willingness by council to say, those one-time fundings are a place where, we might dip into our surplus to get a one-time. One of the challenges is, like, for example, in the same way, when we look at the Heritage Working Group as an example, you kind of see their numbers trickling along around there, $6,000-7,000, and then all of a sudden it jumps to 22. Now again, in 22 and 21. They didn't use all of it in 22 because they came back in 2021. But there was a place where they said, look, if we again have this additional seed money in 2021, then we go to CBT because we go, the city is funding X, we need Y, and they got a significant grant to do all those statements of significance. And the understanding when they came to council on that was, then for the next number of years, they would ask, they would lower their ask from that kind of $6,000-$7,000 to 1,800 to sort of replenish the fact that they kind of got some money up front in 2021 to again, as you said, get that seed money to be able to apply for grants. And so that's a good success story. One of the challenges with sometimes with the grant funding on the touchdowns in the capital is you'll notice that although maybe it hasn't gone up as high as some would have liked, it also has never come down. So the one question that in these ones in particular, they tend to be the ongoing grant. So if you say, hey, this year we might do this, is a council next year going to say, let's give them less? Or there tends to be a process that once it kind of gets to that new number sort of stays there. It's been very challenging for any council to kind of do otherwise.
Colin, that what you just mentioned there was actually talked about on different occasions. And when we got the granting from CBT, if council knows that we give a certain percentage that goes directly to the arts community. And one of the reasons in that conversation at the time, one of the reasons that was allocated was to try and help offset some of these additional costs that come in over and above our ongoing grant. And the ongoing grant is actually, in our case, is significant to keep in mind because most governments, local governments, do them on a year-to-year basis. And they are revisited. They're not just automatic. And to my knowledge, I don't recall us at any time revisiting the actual grant that was handed out the previous year. It was just kept in place for the most part. Not suggesting that we should, but I'm just so that people know that grant has been pretty well stable for many, going back to 2012 here on this sheet anyway. So, and has increased over the years. In some cases.
Sorry, John, I've got another question at some point, or comment. One of the things that's happening in some municipalities around the country and around the world is that the arts and culture community is taking on a part of the responsibility for the climate action plan that the city is taking. As we know, with the targets that we've set, it's a dramatic all of society transformation in one decade. And so in fact, it's been the arts community in many cases that have stepped up and said, well, you know what, of 100% of our focus or operations, we're going to take 20% of that this year and really direct it towards supporting the city in its climate action plan, of which a lot of it is just sort of communications and creating that social momentum around personal habit change or investment changes and stuff like that. And I didn't see that from our community yet. It might be just that they haven't been aware of what's been going on in other municipalities, but I would see that something that we should communicate to the community. Otherwise, we've kind of got our heads in the sand. Like we keep saying, we've got this target. It's nationally, globally agreed to that's the target, and yet we're not really doing anything about it. And when it's all of society that's got to join into the momentum, that it particularly includes, maybe even primarily includes the arts community. So, like I said, a number of municipalities around the country have the arts community stepped up and have developed film festivals or have developed, artisan works around lifestyle changes. There's really interesting things that are happening. And so I would put the message out, maybe I'm doing that now on my behalf, but it'd be great to come from all of council to the arts community, that this is something that should become a priority, not the priority, but certainly a part of your budget and your programming should be focused around, or at least help be informed by Nelson Next and what we're trying to do as a city. You have a powerful voice, and you could really help us with that. So that's my message. Would be great if all of council and the city kind of
Yeah, so
supported that as well.
on that note, Councillor Lockenberg, one of the things that we've been very cautious about is, especially with the in the arts community, is dictating as to what they should do, because that then becomes, if you don't do what we want you to do, then maybe you don't get the money, kind of thing. And that's been our ace in the hole with the arts community overall, is the fact that they've, you know, they have that freedom of speech, liberty to bring in the type of entertainment and shows and movies and film festivals or whatever the case may be, or even with the murals, you know, that freedom to build a mural the way they sort of see fit, or the artist sees it. And we want to be very cautious that if we're giving them money, we're not dictating to them either, that if they don't toe our line, that they wouldn't potentially not receive that funding.
Yeah, John, a great point, and I agree that you want to give the arts community as much latitude as possible. However, I think if they don't hear the message from us that the other communities around the country and around the world are doing this, and that there is a really important role for artists and the arts community because of their voice and their creativity, that we look to them to support. And this is some guidance. Look at what other communities are doing. Again, if we don't do that, is my concern is that the city is just going to, or the community is just going to look back to the local government and say, what are you doing? Why are you not doing it? When, our power is pretty limited. This is something that we all need to do. And so I want to at least send that message, not dictate, but really send that message to them that we need help. And we're giving money. It would be great if they thought about their role in our bigger objectives, I guess.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions?
John, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, so interesting. Councillor Lawton, through the chair, Councillor Lautenberg, as with the Nelson Next aspirations that we have, as everyone is familiar, big goals that come through on that are the creating a space in the town and the community that's very welcoming to visitors and has all the amenities and features that visitors have come to enjoy, and has led to so much of our success and so much of our resiliency, just even in the turmoils of the economic changes over the last couple of years. And one of the allowable uses, as I'm going through the legislation for the MRDTs, is very much project based. And so when we take the idea of creative license and talk about how we want to make these plans come alive, I do think there are linkages there between our approval of the tax rates that we give, which is about 2%, is 2%, one of the on the lower end of the scale of the allowable taxation rates. Obviously, we'd have to get their board on side to ask for more, but I could foresee creating a funding pot that has some scaffolding around it along those purposes of creating more amenities for the community and improving amenities and natural assets and active transportation routes and pathways and renewing ecosystems so that they can be enjoyed by the visitor population, because that all ties into itself. So I think there's a place there where it's less of, hey, here's our plan, you guys should do it, but more like, here's our plan, here's a pot of money, or here's how we're arranging or negotiating to have there be a pot of money. But I agree that we're not going to activate those parts of our community unless we think about how we're enabling them to take on projects that fit within that planning.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Renwick, you okay?
I did see CEO Cormac had his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if it's...
I see one hand. I thought that was still Rick's that was still up there. Okay, Kevin.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
No, I'll just be quick because I think this applies certainly to recreation, we have active transportation, and I know I was asked about why do we have high participation rates? Because we're an active community, and we're an active community because of the recreation assets we have and the recreation we do. So instead of having active transportation, I always thought of we should just have active Nelson and get people active. And if they're active, they're more likely to ride their bike, walk, do all those things that we want on active transportation. So I would suggest to you on the rec commission to really, explore that and how to, because that's the behavior change that we need. And I think if you're an active community, you're way better opportunity to meet those goals, have people on those. Like, we can build the infrastructure, but we need people on those, to take it up. And I think it starts there and as an active community.
Thanks, Kevin. And that's a really good point, because a few years back there was a plan to do an inventory of those assets, actually, that got people out and got them active and got them participating. And I think that's a good idea about the name, because going forward, we're going to look at facilities in a different manner. People are going to want to do different types of activities to, when they get out and about. So I think maybe changing that narrative is a very good idea. And Keith and Rick, you could maybe follow up on that at the Rec Commission as well, because those are natural assets that was talked about earlier also, that help getting for people's wellness. And of course that again ties into arts and culture, wellness of the mind as well. So there's a lot of good things. So before we close, I just wanted to mention there, Councillor Page touched on that 2%. It's really important for us going forward, I think, and with this budget, that we keep in mind when we are looking at the costs and so forth, that we've already added some costs to the taxpayers in sewer and water fees, as an example, garbage tags, and just to name a couple. So it'll be important for us to keep those increases that were already dished out in perspective throughout this budget as we go forward.
So if I may, Mayor, there's a couple things. Okay. So next steps for me, or from today, I didn't hear kind of anything saying, no, I don't want to do that capital project, or that we're concerned about where the reserves are at. We've got an ambitious plan. We always do each year. We have some transitioning and some staff, unfortunately losing some, and we've got postings out there. So we'll, hopefully we'll be able to be successful on pushing what we've got on our plate here. But I'm sensing that I'm not planning on coming back on the capital side, other than when we get to the financial plan. But again, there's always time here if there's questions. But I just was hoping today that unless there was something there, that we would kind of be able to set aside the capital and how that's funded to the side, and then get us back focused on the operating. And I do know, Mayor, that you're away. I know that Councillor Morrison is away, and but I am kind of, unfortunately, because of some of these people away, and we're not looking until probably early March until we could meet again on the operating. And I know that's maybe a bit longer than what Council would like, and I apologize. But as far as scheduling and our own staff constraints, dealing with either hurt or COVID or vacations and whatnot, that if you'll humor us and let us a little bit more time here, that we will come back with some of that information. In saying that, not wanting to miss the list there, that we'll be coming back with, although the capital plan in itself is sort of set up and how I've currently got it funded, we are going to come back with a look at what does borrowing look like, and if we were to do something now compared to later for a number of the significant projects that we know that we're going to do. Some, are looking at we want a grant to be able to move forward, but some as well, hopefully we've got some answers to that. We've got hopefully some green lights on a few of these projects that we've wanted to do their grant pending, but we will come back with a a good paper that we can look at. Even if we borrow now, is it a risk to borrow now, even if we don't need the funds for a couple of years, just based on where the interest rates may be in the future here. So the other thing, Mayor, kind of the unsung people here. You get me blabbing along out here at times, but I really want to, I have a team here of finance people that help me. Chris Jury, obviously, is a key component to that. And I also just really want to thank Suzanne Rourke. She's a very, very diligent and hard worker behind the scenes. Even when she was down with like COVID, she asked for a laptop to be brought to her place so that she could continue to make the capital changes, because she's one of the key individuals in our finance department for dealing with our procurement, and so she's really hands-on and understanding what's happening with the capital, and that has a lot of benefits, because then she's also going to be aware, or she is aware of what's in the pipeline for whatever procurement is coming our way, because she's also been part of the design of and the plan of capital in particular. But I just really want to take an opportunity. You don't see them very often, and back when we could at least meet in the same room, they would be there, and there would be a bit more familiarness and the ability to have them speak to things. But in this kind of medium, it's just sort of me, but it's not just me. I just want council to be aware of that, and I want to thank them for the hard work that they've done over the last number of weeks.
Thanks very much, Colin. It's kind of interesting to notice that yesterday, I forget what the exact number is, but in these numbers, it probably doesn't matter. But, we're working on a budget here, trying to save nickels and dimes where we can. And, it was Facebook lost 260 billion in one day or something, and they still have 500 left. So there's a bit of a balance there somewhere that's out of whack. That, I don't know. It's just, I just can't get my head around the fact that a company like that on a computer could have so much wealth, and unreal.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering. And in the same boat, many of that will be people that are investing because they use the product. So it'd be maybe not the company, but maybe the actual the owners and indirectly through their shares, for sure.
Okay,
that drop is being driven by the first loss of users in its existence.
Yeah, I understand. It's just the wealth, the money just boggles my mind. Almost $1 trillion in value. But okay, so any last questions? I'm not seeing any. Thanks very much to Kevin and Colin special thanks to your staff to supporting you on this, because I know you have many irons in the fire, and to get all this together. Thank you very much for doing it. Gabriel, thank you. And I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Renwick and Councillor Leuchtenberg. Thanks, everybody. All in favour? Take care. Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.